I lived in the mountains my whole childhood, and when I was 12, I was friends with these sisters that lived one cul-de-sac over. The roads were separated by a patch of trees, and I would walk through them to go to play with them. And one day, my dad and I were invited to a barbecue at their house. That evening, me and the sisters and their friends, we were jumping on the trampoline in the backyard when the younger sister started acting weird. When asked, she said that she was seeing something on the far side of the next-door neighbor's fence every time that she jumped. One by one, we all tried it, and we all could see, well, something. At first, we dismissed it as the neighbor's big fluffy dog. We went inside to tell the neighbor that his dog might have gotten out and went upstairs to the sister's room. But while up there, they started telling us about a skeletal figure that would enter their room at night and watch them. The younger sister told us about one time she threw a pillow at it and it hit the figure, and about how they think that it gets up there by climbing the gutter pipe next to their window. We all went quiet because we were scared, of course, when we heard like a clicking outside the window that clearly sounded like metal. Of course, we all dashed out of the door and downstairs to the adults because we were thoroughly freaked out. I had my dad carry me home because I was too scared to look into the dark woods. But even then, I didn't fully believe them, until they moved away a week later, and I saw the thing myself. It was late evening, and I was heading inside after playing in the woods, when I saw it peeking at me from behind a tree. It looked like a skeleton, except sharper, with spiky protrusions around its joints, and it had red pinprick lights in its hollow eye sockets. I pretended that I didn't see it, and I just hurried inside. That night, I woke up to something scratching at the wall under my window. In fact, I would wake up multiple times a week to the scratching. It was like something was trying to get my attention, so I would look outside, and exactly what spot I was hearing the scratching coming from was tall enough for an adult human to reach their arms up at. And this entity, it was adult human-sized for sure. I never did look, I was too scared, but the scratching happened for years until I moved out of that house. And that wasn't the only time that I saw the thing in the woods, but I never saw it again after I moved, so it must consist there or whatever. I don't tell this story a lot because people always dismiss it as just a deer, but that would have had to have been one consistent deer scratching at my wall 3 to 4 times a week for at least 3 years straight, which to me, that just doesn't add up. For some context, I live about 30 minutes out of the city in a wooded area. Closest neighbors are about 2 to 3 miles down the road, and this could have very well been a human, which is a lot more scary to me, to be honest, but I'm really not so sure. I thought that I would share this here as it very much felt paranormal and made my hair stand up. So last night, I was woken up by my dog crying at the back door. I look at the time and it's about 3:30 in the morning. I think to myself, that's weird, as he never needs to be let out at this time. I get up and turn on the porch lights and let him out. He was hesitant to go out when I opened the door, which was also weird for him, but I watch as he runs over to the back fence and starts barking. This wasn't his normal bark too. He basically sounded like Cujo, alarmed. As I've never seen him that distressed, I open the door and call out to him to come back inside. This was when I hear it, whistling, but it sounded like someone whistling a song. I don't see anything at this point, but still freaked out because, well, I'm not sure who the heck would be out at my property at this time, let alone at all, really. I'm desperately trying to get him to come in, but he's fixated on whatever he's barking at. I run to the kitchen to grab his treats, hoping to bribe him inside. I come back to the door and I hear someone or something barking back at my dog, but in a high-pitched voice. In fact, it sounded like when a human barks like a dog, if that makes sense. I look towards where the noise is coming from and can barely make out what looked like, I don't know, glowing eyes staring out from the forest. The whistling starts again for a moment, from that direction too, and as soon as I shook his treats and called out to him, I hear a very loud and deep growl. Not from my dog, definitely not from my dog. It didn't sound human either, but that noise sounded like a very mad, very large animal or something like that. My dog comes running in through the door, straight past me and his treats, right into his crate. I slam the door behind him and lock it, brought him into the room with me, and barricade us in there till daylight. Now, I could reason that the growling could be a bear or maybe a mountain lion, but what was the whistling and the human-like barking? I'm really not sure what it was, but it was enough to scare my dog to the point where he was trembling and panting. He's a German Shepherd, and he's a big brave boy most of the time. In fact, I've never really seen him that upset. I'll admit, too, that I am terrified and hope that whatever that was never happens again. I will admit, too, that I am terrified and hope that whatever that was never happens again. When I was around 8 years old, I went on a weekend camping trip with a big group of people, mostly boys around my age and their dads. I woke up in the middle of the night because I had to pee, so I crawled out of the tent without waking anyone up. Our tents were in a big clearing, so I walked over to the tree line to find a spot, but that's when I noticed something weird. All of a sudden, the forest went, well, quiet. I remember noticing specifically that I couldn't even hear the leaves crunching underneath my feet anymore, even though I could feel them as I walked. And a moment later, I walked up on some sort of spirit that looked like a man in robes standing on top of a stump. He had a glowing light around him, and his facial features were blurred like there was a haze around his face. Weirdly, I wasn't scared at all, and we talked and stayed there together for a while. When I finally walked out of the tree line back to the camp, one of the chaperones immediately ran up to me, saying that they'd been looking for me for a long time, hours in fact, and asking where I had been for so long. I was confused by that because that conversation felt like all of 10-15 minutes. I told him that I had to use the bathroom and met an angel in the woods. He just kind of dismissed it, and he sent me back to my tent. To this day, too, I wish so badly that I could remember what we talked about, but I have no idea. All I do remember is meeting him. As a kid, I didn't think twice about it and continued my camping trip like nothing even happened. It wasn't until I was older, looking back on the experience, that I realized just how strange it all was. Has anyone ever had something happen to them like this? And if you have, what was it? It was 2007 and I was 13. The new SmackDown 5 Raw WWE game had just come out, and I went into my small town on a Sunday morning to purchase it. After purchasing the game, I was in awe of the cover and the synopsis on the back of the game, so I sat on a bench to read it and take in the excitement of buying this new game. I lived in a small market town in England, so Sundays were often very quiet. While sitting on the bench, I looked over to the bus stop across the road and noticed a strange-looking, scraggly man walking towards me. I was a bit nervous seeing this because, although I was 13 or 14, I looked about maybe 11 as I was very small. On his approach, he asked me, "What's that you're holding?" I explained it was my new game. I then said, "Look, I need to go to my brother. He's waiting for me in the mall." Although he wasn't, I felt like I needed to say this just to get away. As I walked off, the man began to follow me, asking my name, my age. I replied Lee, which was a fake name, and told him a fake age. On entering the mall, I started walking quicker and quicker, but I didn't want to start running, for some reason I wanted to save face, I guess, but he kept asking if I had a girlfriend, and as he got closer, I noticed he had a scar down his face, and also lots of jewelry on. To his question, I responded yes, as I thought it may put him off if he knew that I had a girlfriend. I then ran into a shop in the mall and started flicking through the magazines, but he persisted with the questions. I then got up the courage to run as fast as I could, but he began to chase me. Eventually, I got away, and when I got home, I didn't tell my parents and I just went upstairs and played my game, but later that day I told my mum and she called the police immediately. I then had to go to a police station local to myself and tell them what happened and pick him out of a number of photos the police had on a laptop. And when I found him, apparently this man had kidnapped and done many terrible things to many young boys. And I was just lucky enough to have escaped him. So my house has, for as long as I can remember at least, had major levels of paranormal activity. It's an old farmhouse that's been passed through about 4 generations of my family, and there have been plenty of deaths on the property too. It was built around 1880, and while it's not got a particularly bloody past, it definitely has its stories. My grandma died in what would later become my nursery. My great-grandfather fell out of the hayloft back in the 1920s. They found an old unmarked grave left from the Civil War that got left behind in the 70s, etc., etc. Activity is as common as a housefly around here, really. Cabinets and doors open and shut, things get moved, footsteps in the hall when nobody else is home, figures in doorways. We hear a voice in the old grain silo sometimes, which isn't possible because if someone was in there, that they'd suffocate. None of it feels or acts malicious, so I guess we're just used to it, and sort of take it on the chin for the most part. I'm so used to it, in fact, that I completely ignored someone trying to break into my back door last night because I just thought that it was the normal activity. I was in my brother's room, fiddling with his PC for some stuff, and I heard weird knocking sounds from outside the house. Knocking is sort of normal here, but it's usually inside. But in the end, I just went ahead and ignored it. This went on for about 3 to 4 minutes before my dog started growling really loudly. So loudly, in fact, that I could hear him from across the house. He really doesn't growl at anything besides the basement door, so I thought that was a bit weird, and I went to go and calm him down in the living room. I heard the back door in the kitchen shaking and yelled, "Stop it, you're going to break the handle," because that's just the sort of thing that we say when something is getting particularly rough. And maybe 30 seconds later, I hear the door swing open, and without really thinking about it, I yelled, "I'm pretty sure I told you to knock it off." And I didn't realize anything was actually wrong until a voice that I didn't recognize cursed super loud and the door slammed shut. Of course, I immediately ran to see what it was, just in time to see a silver truck peeling out of my driveway. So, yeah, essentially, just a warning not to get too comfortable with your haunted housemates, because it might turn out that it wasn't them after all making the noise. This story takes place in a very remote wooded area in northern Sweden. At the time, I was about 15 years old. So my and my cousin's family were staying in our summer cabin. The cabin is placed on a hill, and at the bottom of this hill there's a lake with a wooden bridge and 2 boats. The property is surrounded by a dense forest, so the only thing that you could really see when looking out the window is the hill leading down to the lake and boats. It was maybe 9 p.m. when me, my dad, my sister, my 3 cousins, and their dad decided to light a fire down by the lake. My grandparents, aunt, and mum decided not to go because it was getting late. We just wanted to look out at the lake, stargaze a bit, and chat. We brought our grandparents' dog and our cousin's dog out with us. We walked down to the lake, lit the fire, and we started talking. After about maybe an hour, the conversation had sort of fizzled out a bit, but it was nice and quiet. And suddenly I started feeling a bit off and just couldn't shake the feeling of being watched from the woods. We were sitting with our backs facing the woods and the cabin. The feeling was unsettling, but I tried thinking about other things when, from out of nowhere, my dad just says, "Yeah, I'm good." Everyone turned to look at my dad in confusion since there was no conversation taking place. Dad looks back at the cabin and then at my cousin, who was sitting next to him, and said, "Yeah, I'm doing good." "What?" she responded, confused. "You asked me how I was doing, so I answered," Dad said. "I didn't ask you anything," my cousin said. Dad looked confused and then said that he had felt someone lean over and whisper in his ear, "Hello, how are you?" He described feeling whatever it was breathe on his neck and put a hand on his shoulder. He thought that it was my mum at first and turned around but didn't see anything, so assumed it was someone here. But right after explaining this, the two dogs that were with us started growling loudly while looking behind where my dad was sitting towards the woods. We all freaked out, put out the fire, and we started running towards the cabin. And yeah, we haven't gone outside the cabin when dark ever since then, and it's a memory that I'll never forget. Whatever it was nice enough, I suppose, to ask how Dad was doing, so I don't think it had bad intentions. But if anyone has any idea as to what this could have been, then please do comment, because I would love to know. The only thing that I can think of is Swedish nature spirits called Vitra that play tricks on people, but according to some people can burn down buildings as well, or capture people if they're bothering them. In other words, they aren't really known for being nice, so I don't know. This happened when I was around 15 to 16 years old. My best friend and some of my classmates, they smoked a bit, like 10 to 11 p.m. at night, before my best friend and I split together from the rest of the guys to go and get some munch at a gas station. Behind the gas station, there was a lake with some benches where we chilled with some joints and enjoyed our hamburgers. Then suddenly we saw this guy, or maybe a better word is being, from the other side of the lake, like 500 meters away, pacing back and forth at the shore, kind of staring at us or eyeballing us like we'd kill his mum or something. He was very erratic, pacing back and forth, and eyeballing us like I said, when all of a sudden this guy dives into the lake and starts swimming toward us. Keep in mind, this is in Norway and it was between November and December and it was absolutely freezing outside, like our fingers hurt from holding the joint sort of cold. While this guy was swimming toward us, we see him doing the butterfly swim method, but this guy is swimming so quickly, like a medium fast-paced jogging speed almost. While we're seeing this guy, we were just sort of WTFing to each other, like, what is this guy doing? And he keeps getting closer and closer. We start to freak out a bit, and he was around 100 meters away when we just ran for our lives, like running as if there was a lunatic out there and we were in danger. And after like 30 to 40 minutes of running, we just split off and we ran home. Now, this story had me thinking for quite some time that, I don't know, maybe we were just high, but we all saw the same thing, which seems very unlikely. My friend and I talked about this today, and it was really so eerie to talk about this with him when everyone else that I talked to, it just sounds like a crazy guy, but we have no idea what it was. I mean, it looked like a person and, well, humanoid at least, but the ability to swim so quickly across 500 meters like that, in like 0 to 3 degrees Celsius water, is just kind of impossible. I'm one of those people, as far as I know anyway, who has never had a single paranormal encounter. Whenever I tell this story to people though, they always believe otherwise. So I was very small, definitely not older than 7 years at the max. I was playing in my backyard as usual during the day, and there's this concrete wall that separates our property from my neighbors, who happens to be my uncle. The wall was like broken down on one part, and you could easily go through it to my uncle's side. But you'd have to walk through almost half a mile of weeds and tall grass to get there. I knew that there were rats and some trash there too, so I just never really went back there, though I did play near the wall quite a lot. Now one day, I was doing just that while my mum talked to my grandparents in the kitchen. I couldn't see them, but they could see me and were close enough to hear. Anyway, I was near the broken part of the wall when this other little girl appears out of nowhere on the other side. She was super friendly and looked a little older than me, I guess. I remember her vividly wearing oversized bright blue jean overalls and a pretty straw hat. I remember describing her to my mum as farmer clothes, and it made sense since this happened to be in summer. She looked like a Sarah Kay illustration from the clothes, but she was very pale, had freckles and straight kind of shoulder length, but maybe longerish hair, I guess. I have no recollection of what we talked about or what we played, but that's what we did for like several minutes. She told me her name was Margarita. She was really fun to be around, but I remember feeling weird about the fact that she wouldn't ever come to my side of the backyard, yet was very insistent that I went to where she was. Of course I wouldn't because of the rats in the trash, and that I was very certain I wasn't allowed to go there too. I remember though explaining this to her and her looking sort of disappointed that I should ask my mum first. Now this next part I remember very well. She insisted that my mum would be okay with it, that there's nothing bad like rats behind the wall and that I shouldn't be afraid. Mind you, she didn't seem angry about my objections. She just seemed sort of annoyed that I wouldn't just trust her. That made me feel very self-conscious, enough to say that I'd go, but I still should tell my mum first anyway. I don't remember her reaction to that, but I thought that she would be happy that I said yes in the end. So I run back inside and explain to my mum the situation. She's understandably weirded out since that wall is not connected to the street or anything, and the only other girls who would go there beside me didn't fit the description at all. My cousin was 2 years younger and not at all like the girl that I described. The other neighbors were too far away and their kids didn't look anything like that either. But I remember she paused and starts talking in a way kid me is sure that she thinks that I'm playing. But I assure her, slightly offended, that Margarita wasn't imaginary. So we go outside so that we can meet her. I run back outside so I get there first. And the whole thing couldn't have taken any longer than a minute, but I don't see her anymore. Of course, I start calling out to her, thinking that she must be behind the wall, shy maybe. My mum then begins talking like one does to a kid's imaginary friend. She's talking at nothing. I'm annoyed as heck at this point. Even writing this I am, because I know that I didn't make her up. I started looking around for her, but my mum was growing impatient, and she didn't like that I was about to go behind the wall because I'm not allowed to, which annoyed me more because I knew that, but now it looked like I didn't. I expected her to come back the next day, but after that, I never saw Margarita again. Which I can see is probably one of the reasons why my mum thought that I made her up. It's more of a grandma name than a kid's, I suppose. Anyway, my mum surely noticed that I was expecting to see her again, so she acted like Margarita was there already. I felt like I had an imaginary friend forced upon me, and I was still sad and angry, and I couldn't prove I was saying the truth, but I guess I was just too little and easy to influence, so I too kind of made myself believe that I had an imaginary friend named Margarita. Just that, now that she was imaginary, she wasn't the girl that I saw, because I did, and instead a big butterfly like that one butterfly Pokemon that I liked. I knew that she was imaginary, unlike the real Margarita that I met that day, and felt a bit silly playing with her, but it also felt nice and comfortable, so I had Margarita, the Pokemon rip-off butterfly, in my mind for a couple of years. But I never did forget about the real one and the feelings of my mum not believing me again. Every time I told this story, it was around the topic of my mum not believing me, but everyone always acted spooked by it. Over the years, I started to feel a bit spooked myself too, I'll admit. But who knows, maybe I'm still too easy to influence, and I just don't know if it was real or not. Being of Middle Eastern descent, and growing up later in Western Canada, I remember faintly when we lived for a time in Saudi Arabia, when my dad was a contracted architectural engineer for a large American weapons company, where he designed and built foreign employee offices, living quarters, and buildings for the testing compounds in the harsh Saudi desert with other engineers from across the Middle East and Europe. The company that he worked for was none other than Raytheon, a well-known merchant of death, that had dealings with the emirs of the land, who were swimming in black oil and luxury, and were the de facto government at the time. I remember meeting some of them too, who were rather pleasant and came with toys and candies for me and my siblings whenever they would come to our house to socialize and make their plans with my father. Little did I know, my father would tell me years later, in the comfort of our Vancouver apartment of course, that these men in their immaculate one-piece suits were quite ruthless businessmen with killers and spies in their employ. We had hosted men who were cousins, uncles, and brothers to the Saudi royals. They had toppled governments and raised up armies and militias and even terrorist groups all across the Middle East and Africa. My dad had one colleague that could build a bomb from common items in your fridge and under your sink that could level a building, and that he learned this from intelligence agencies that will remain unnamed. I was about 6 years old when we left for Canada in the early 90s, but I remember our time there, an old brick bungalow house we had lived in, a large accommodation with a sandy yard. It was a sparse neighborhood. There were other houses, but not close enough to be in each other's business or hear your neighbors' noises. Most of the people living in this area were in the employ of the royal family in some capacity. They were well off, educated, and well connected. There were several empty houses around as well that I would sometimes roam around and explore, if I found the opportunity to escape the confines of our home, that is. Now, I had heard of the jinn early on from my mother as warnings against bad behavior, or when she wanted to scare me with images of beastly ghouls. She would say that they appeared in many forms as shadows, humanoid chimera-like beings with hooved feet and tails, as transparent ghosts, or as invisible unseen forces even. She said that they could also appear as humans and that they were great mimics. They could lure you into places with the voices of people that you knew. She would also say that they liked waiting until you slept, as they could enter your dreams for unknown reasons. Many times she would also ascribe any possibly paranormal or odd goings-on to the jinn. For example, if one heard unexplained noises from an empty room, or even if objects were lost, thoroughly looked for, and later found in area searched several times, well, that was them, playing their tricks. She would often say a prayer against them and or curse them either in the singular, shaitan, or in the plural, shaitan. My mother would alert me against going to the abandoned or empty houses, for she warned me that these are the places that the jinn would occupy, waiting for wayward souls to attach to and torture. My father, being a rather pragmatic man, told me to never mind her stories, to just go and explore, but to be careful of strangers and not to be gone for too long. Now, she told me that once, when I was 3 years old, I was sleeping in my room at night, and she had cause to check up on me after being washed over with a foreboding feeling, a creepy sensation that she needed to see that I was okay. Upon entering my room, she said that there was a black shadow in the corner near my bed, that she saw it clearly for a split second, and not only saw but also felt, and she flipped the light switch on, and it just dematerialized instantly. Being scared for her child, she spent several nights in my room with me before she brought a holy man to cleanse the space and say some prayers. After which, she said that there were not any more occurrences of shadows looming over her children, and she seemed satisfied with that. I don't recall ever seeing any moving shadows or ghouls in that part of my life, but there was something later, in my late teens, several occurrences of, well, what I can term as shadow people appearing. We had moved to British Columbia by this time. We're awarded citizenship for some years. I was finishing high school, well adjusted, lots of friends at school and even in the building that we lived in. My two brothers and sister were friends with all the other kids and teens who also lived in our building, and the neighboring apartments as well. This was in the early 2000s, before kids had cell phones or even spent time on computers really. We were always doing something outside in groups, having fun and just causing a ruckus. In fact, I don't even think a day was spent inside. If we could help it, we didn't need money or reason to just roam about at the very least, and more often than not, we had our regular haunts and meet-up spots. I remember one particular night though. I was maybe 17 or perhaps 18, where I had an experience that was quite jarring and was also shared with my brother. So I had been sleeping and woke up, paralyzed, unable to move or speak. But to my horror, there was sitting in this chair beside my bed a shadow man with red eyes. His energy was malevolent and contemptuous. He didn't speak, just sat there, and even though I couldn't see a mouth, I knew that he was grinning. I could sort of see the outline of it. He was definitely a man, but just made of shadow that my eyes couldn't see through. He was watching me struggle to break my paralysis for what felt like 5 or 6 minutes. Obviously, I was terrified and couldn't keep a straight thought in my head, but I was trying to somehow run away, even though it was impossible. I remember making mewling noises and moaning, trying to scream, but everything was paralyzed. Even though my mouth was agape and I couldn't shut it, I still couldn't scream. I couldn't do anything but try to scream, and it was just coming out as muffled noises. In that moment, I could feel that this shadow being was deriving pleasure from my anguish. He was just sitting there, about 4 feet away from me, as clear as anything else in the dark room, just staring at me with those red eyes. Then, all of a sudden, he stood up, belched out an evil chuckle, and zipped away in the direction of my brother's room down the hall. He flew at an alarming speed. Weirdly, too, I could see 2 trails of red light as his eyes left along with the shadow body, at which point I snapped out of my paralysis. As soon as he left my room, the paralysis, it broke. All I could focus on was his laugh before he left, and honestly, I thought that it was over, that this thing zipped away out of the apartment back to, well, wherever it is that it came from. At that, I got out of bed and went to the kitchen to get a drink of water. I was shaken up, I'll admit, but I was convinced that this was just a weird, vivid dream of some sort. It did feel real, as normal as life, in fact, as real as talking to another person. And I mean, I definitely seemed to be awake. I wasn't sleeping. But while I stood there slowly drinking my cold water, I heard the same muffled screams that I was making coming from somewhere down the hall. It was coming from the last room, my middle brother's room. I walked over there and listened by his door, and yes, he was making noises, so I opened his door and I froze as I saw a portion of the air on top of him was dark, darker than the already dark room. It was like a cloud was sort of hanging over him, and he looked sort of paralyzed like I was, and he was moaning exactly like I was too. I can only describe it as sort of silently screaming, but I ran over and shook him awake. It took a few seconds, but I shook him hard and eventually he came to. He looked at me with eyes wide in fear and said that there was a shadow man with red eyes laughing at him while he made him frozen. He said that he woke up paralyzed as this shadow man came into the room, and this thing was standing above him the whole time laughing and just watching him struggle. Honestly, I could barely believe it. I told him that it just happened to me too, and that I heard him from the kitchen. I told him how it left my room and went in the direction of his room after it let me go, and both of us had trouble sleeping that night. It was the most surreal experience that I've ever had. This was the first time any paralysis happened to him as well, and the first time anything like this event had ever happened. He wasn't into any paranormal stuff, and it was a shock to him that things like this could even happen. He never took my mother's story seriously, I suppose. He was always just as level-headed and grounded as my father. Unlike me, I did have an interest in these things, and UFOs, ghosts and the such. But I also remember this as a shocking first time. It was sort of an assault on my reality, even if I was open-minded to the paranormal. In any case, we told our mum about it the next day, and she immediately blamed a jinn. She was reminded of the time that she saw a shadowy presence in my room back in Saudi Arabia. We couldn't stop her from praying in our rooms and lighting her incense to clear the bad air. And it must have worked as, well, I never felt that presence return. But it certainly wasn't the last time that I saw a shadow being. It was never as blatant and in your face as the first time, but it happened many times more. I've told this story to many people and shared it online even, and have never heard of a case where the shadow being attacked 2 people consecutively. So, was this just a case of sleep paralysis hallucinations? But how did me and my brother share this delusion if that's truly what it was? To this day, we still talk about it. I had many other sleep paralysis encounters with shadow beings, but never like that first time, never as malevolent, and never again shared with another person. In fact, I get sleep paralysis quite often now, even had it last night, but I haven't had a shadow being during these times in 20 years or more. I guess I've just become used to it now, waking up, unable to move, and have learned to keep calm until it passes, which it always does in a minute or so. There were many other times I've seen the shadow people during waking hours, fleetingly, in the peripherals of my vision, darting by. As have others, I know. Other times I've seen them when entering a dark room before turning a light on, after which they always disappear. I guess I just got used to them, I suppose. They seemed fairly harmless, and eventually I just stopped noticing them. I figured after some time and study that they, most likely being jinn, were just sort of living their lives, and that the veil that separates our lives from theirs can become thin, rendering them somewhat visible or lets their presence be felt. Reading about jinn as much as I could, I have learned that they have lives like we do. They have children apparently, duties, can be good and tolerant, or, well, downright mean. Some are interested in pranks, some can grant boons, and some can possess you even. But I have read that possessions are exceedingly rare. I've even read that they have religions. They can believe in God. Being shapeshifters, their most common form is a shadow in the shape of a human. But perhaps that's also the most common way that our minds can grasp them. Maybe our eyes can only catch them in a certain visual frequency or something. They have their favorite dwellings, but can appear anywhere, which means that they're not locked in a location in ways that ghosts or spirits can be. One night, when I was maybe 19 or 20, I had an encounter on the Blue Line train in Los Angeles that still haunts me to this day. So I was waitressing in downtown Long Beach and worked the closing shift. I was on the train around midnight, heading towards Los Angeles. It was just me and one other man on the train. I had my headset on, minding my own business, and he was sitting in front of me with his hood up. Everything was fine too until we neared Watts, California. The man, he got up, walked to the train doors, and as they opened, he turned back to look at me, and that was when I saw it. He had no face, no features, no eyes, no lips, no mouth, just pure blackness under the hood. He walked off the train, and I felt like my heart almost fell out of my body. 20 years later, I'm still trying to figure out what I saw that day. Has anyone else experienced anything like this? Or do you have any ideas as to what this could have been? This happened about 2 hours ago. So I, a 26-year-old female, and my boyfriend, 36 and male, decided to go to the store to get some oil. But we have to go out 45 minutes just to get this out in a bad part of the city, but it's the only European store that has the actual stuff that I grew up with eating. My family and I are from the Ukraine but live in the US, and it's difficult finding authentic places that have exactly what we had, and this is the only place that I've found that has it down to the exact brand. Anyway, as we're driving, we're on a 3-lane road, which we need to get into one of those mid-section U-turn type of lanes. We get into our left turn lane, and a black car blitzes from the far right lane through the middle lane to cut us off at the left lane, which my boyfriend and I are like, what the heck? And then they stop at the green light for the U-turn. My boyfriend gently honks twice in a nice way in case they were on the phone to go since the light is now green. They go forward and we go to the parking lot directly on our right to the store that we need to go to. The car in front of us, which was now on our far left lane, goes through another 2 lanes and drives onto the sidewalk to go into the parking lot that we were going into, and rides nearly on our bumper, pressing their horn the entire time that we drove. My boyfriend eventually decided to stop a few feet further than the store instead of parking at it, and at that point, I realized that his car camera was not on. I can't remember the name in English, but it's a camera that records in front and back as you drive. I tap it since usually it starts recording when it feels motion. It didn't turn on, and we realized that it somehow was disconnected on the car. As he's trying to get the camera plugged back into the car, the black car pulls up, and I see 3 guys looking 18 to 20 in there. All 3 are African American. They roll their window down, and the driver then reaches for something, about to take out something, and I'm screaming at my boyfriend, "Just drive, go, just go." And my boyfriend slammed onto the gas pedal. We drove off, and that black car does too. My boyfriend suddenly began doing donuts in the parking lot to get their car to back off while I'm screaming, "Oh my goodness, the police, call the police. I need to call the police," and managed to dial 911 as he was doing his last donut, and then suddenly began driving out of the parking lot. The black car was still chasing us out as I finally got an answer, and when the police asked where we were, I sort of blanked out and stuttered in panic that we were currently being chased, and my boyfriend yelled out what road we were passing. He used to do Uber for like 7 years, and he knows every street name by heart pretty much. The guys, though, they kept going after us until we were about 3 or 4 blocks away from the police station. We stayed on the line, and they probably realized what we were doing and swerved to a random road on our left. At some point, we got disconnected, but the officer called me right back and stayed with us as we pulled into the station. We explained what happened, and the officer was nice. He offered to escort us back to the store following our car in case the guys were still there. We showed the skid marks, and the officer said nice as a bit of a joke. It was all good in the end, and he did paperwork as we grabbed the sunflower oil that I really wanted, and had my boyfriend try authentic Slavic ice cream for the first time, which he agrees is 100% better than the American stuff. And we decided to cut our day short, thanked the officer, and we went home. My boyfriend said that he was amazed at how quickly I made all the right decisions and was actually surprised I even called the police because he's aware that I have a history of being, SA'd by 2 on-duty officers 4 years ago, and I've been too terrified to call or speak to officers since then. But I was so terrified of getting shot that my only priority was to call the police in the end. I was so terrified that my chest hurt, and I was happy that we were safe. My boyfriend is now laughing, saying that he can now prove front-wheel Dodge cars can do great donuts, but I genuinely hope that I don't run into those 3 guys ever again. This happened quite a few years ago, but I can still remember it like it was yesterday. This wasn't a ghost that I saw maybe out of the corner of my eye for a split second, or from some super far away place. I saw it up close and personal for a solid 5 to 6 seconds, which, when you're seeing a ghost, seems like an eternity. So I was laying on my couch at night, when all of a sudden I see a spectral figure, made of blue light, emerge from around the corner of my hallway and start walking toward me. He was made of light, but he was also sort of transparent as well, so I could see through him. He couldn't have been more than 10 to 15 feet away from me. I was completely floored, perplexed, amazed, shocked, all at the same time. He was in such great detail that I could tell what type of clothing he was even wearing, some type of military garment, and that he was young, an Asian male in his 20s. He had a stoic, somber look on his face, almost sad, I would say. As he walked toward me, he left a trail of undulating blue light behind him that kind of waved up and down. This lasted for a solid 5 or 6 seconds, the entire time my eyes are completely wide open and I can feel my heartbeat start to increase. And as quickly as he came, he then vanished into thin air as he got closer to me. I have never seen anything like it before in my life, and I seriously doubt that I ever will see anything like it ever again. I told my family about it, and they said, "Oh, you've always had a vivid imagination." But it was like, no, I know what I saw. There's no way what I saw wasn't real. I've never believed in ghosts before, thinking that anyone who does has to be certified crazy, but after that night, I truly believe in ghosts and some sort of afterlife. For some weird reason, I didn't feel scared when I saw him or even after. The dominant feeling that I had was just pure amazement and bewilderment to what I had just witnessed. Everyone always says that if or when you see a ghost that it is scary, but that wasn't the case with me at all. So, am I crazy? Has anyone ever seen anything similar? If you have, then please do share your thoughts, because truly, I could use it right now. I was born in Amherst, Ohio, April 7th, 1984. When I lived in Lorain, Ohio in the late 80s, I lived in this 2-story house. It was old, and there's just some things that are in that house that always left me puzzled, and in a bit of a total mystery, I guess. I'm now 40. I've talked about my experiences with other people, but all I get back is snickering, made fun of, or laughed it off as being unbelievable. I've talked about this part of my life the same way, and nothing ever changes my story. Behind our house, my mother and father created this huge, beautiful garden. And between the ages of around 3 to 5 years old, my parents would throw some weekend cookouts. My dad would invite his work or drinking buddies over, and Mum would invite her people as well. The floor model stereo would be out to play in the background, Dad would be socializing with his people, the grill is grilling, my light blue kiddie pool would be filled up with water, our front yard would be out of parking spaces, the driveway was spoken for, so the rest would just have to park their cars in the backyard where we were. Now, one weekend, I decided to walk around the house by myself for some reason. I had no reason for doing so, but I was just walking. I found myself in the front yard alone, so I decided to continue journeying around the house into a full complete circle. When I had done that, I came to a shocking discovery, though. Everything and everyone was suddenly gone. I mean, the pool, the stereo, people, cars, even the garden was gone. What was once a garden was nothing but a bed of grass now. But here's the weird thing. I can still hear everyone. Yes, I was awake, I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't just seeing things. In dreams, when talking about dreams, you only know about 5% of the dream, and it's all over the place when telling it, right? But in this case, I remember everything. The way that I've explained it here is the way that I've explained it for almost 40 years now as well. Ever since, I've always been convinced that I've found what seemed like a portal, and so I kept doing it. It was the same result every single time. Everything was gone. Sometimes I often wonder what would have happened to me if I had just kept walking circles around the house without stopping. Would I have happened to become a missing persons case, or someone erased from memory altogether? I've recently gone back to that house in Ohio since moving away in the late 80s. I was excited to show my wife and kids the first house that I lived in. I was also excited about the thought of actually getting some answers and putting to bed this mystery. But when approaching the house, all we arrived to was an empty lot. I felt sad, sort of ticked off, and beyond disappointed. All that I have are what seems to be made-up stories, but still I live with this mystery. And that's why I'm here. I would really like to try and get some answers as to what this was, and I'm really hoping that someone somewhere has had something similar happen to them, or has an answer, or at least some thoughts. All are welcome to comment because, like I said, I am completely perplexed. This happened to me and my friend G when I was on my 3rd year of high school after the COVID pandemic and lockdown. Me and G live in the same city. It's really not that big. We had this place that we enjoyed hanging out because there was no one around there. No drunk dudes, no annoying babies and crazy parents, only a very few people and the calming sound of the grass. It's near the biggest park we have here, so the trail isn't that hidden. Anyway, we used to go there during the summer, but it was around November and it was kind of cold out and we were shaking a bit. But we just wanted to be alone, and I guess the creepy atmosphere was sort of intriguing. We had only one incident the last time that we went there, which I think I'll share here in the future at some point, but he was skipping about going there, but I was a sort of talkative person too, so it wasn't hard to convince him that day. And I kid you not that a few minutes after we entered the trail, Somebody's shadow began to block the only way out. This was kind of scary because, it was pitch black, 10:40 p.m. and it was winter, and my phone's light was the only sufficient thing that we had for seeing the silhouette. I think it was a man, definitely not long hair, but I don't know how tall, and I'm not completely sure it was a man. Even though I flashed him with my flashlight from my phone, I still couldn't see the colors of his clothes or body or anything. It was just too dark out and my phone wasn't strong enough, and it had a lightless background. Not even the moonlight was out that night, nor the flame of a lighter that he used could change that as well. It was completely black and he was devoid of color, except for the sort of sub-cattering high of that little flame in my light. He didn't move at all, except when he took the lighter from what I assume was a pocket on him. I was terrified, G was terrified and was grabbing my right arm as if his life depended on it. But no matter how much we were shaking or panicking, that man didn't move. He stood still on the trail without making any type of sound. So I started saying out loud how lucky we were to have brought our knives with us this day, in case we would have found something dangerous. At one point, me and G discussed about calling our parents to take us from there, and that we would have to elaborate a story so that they wouldn't be concerned. But as I turned to watch my phone, G said that we still needed the light on the guy to keep an eye on him, so I immediately raised it in the direction of that man, and I was shocked. G was frantically tapping my arm saying, "He's not there, we need to go," and it was true. In those few seconds, he was out of our vision now, which of course drove us crazy, and prompted us to run faster and faster in the direction from where the streetlights would illuminate everything, making us feel safer. Eventually we got out of the trail, but I could have sworn that I heard someone following us. Of course, I stayed with G for the rest of the evening until we arrived at his house complex. I felt really guilty about getting him to go there that night, and so I accompanied G back home, and it definitely made me feel a little bit better, but I don't know. Maybe it was nothing, and maybe I'm just overthinking it. Maybe the other person was as scared of us as we were of them. But something tells me that whoever that person was, that they were up to no good, and we just so happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. So I have a series of short stories from when I lived in Utah years ago. These stories, they take place in the time period from 2003 to 2014. I originally come from Utah, but haven't lived there in years, and have lived all over the United States since then. So I've lived in lots of places where they have their own histories, hauntings, and interesting stories. So here's the first ones, well, chronologically speaking anyway. So in 2003, my then stepdad, who was and is abusive, controlling, and treated my mother and my siblings and I horribly, began escalating his behavior. I noticed a pattern that, as he got worse, strange things would happen around the house. Like, family members and I would hear disembodied voices throughout the house. A strange presence would be felt at some times and then not at others. And, most notably, we would see shadow figures running around the house. These were not tall, humanoid figures that you typically think of when you think of shadow figures. These were deformed, almost animal or alien in nature, and moved extremely fast and had an almost impish quality to them. We would occasionally hear a man's voice in the house calling our names too, but we left that house and moved to a different neighborhood north of Salt Lake City in Bountiful, Utah. After settling into our new home in Bountiful in August of 2004, other members of the family began noticing strange things too. Footsteps would be heard in the hallways late at night. My mother would be working in her office at her computer and occasionally hear footsteps, and one night she felt something touch her back even. She turned around and there was obviously nobody there. Later, my brother saw an apparition of a young girl wearing white standing at the end of the hallway. Thinking that it may have been one of my sisters, she went to go and check to see if everything was all right, and the girl just disappeared, and my mum saw that both of my sisters were both still sound asleep in their bedrooms. After doing some research into the history of the house, we learned that a young girl had passed away from leukemia in that same house a number of years prior. Her bedroom It had been the same room that was my mum's office, and the old photo of the girl who passed away matched the appearance of the apparition that my mother saw at the end of the hallway that night. In 2006, as the behavior of my then stepdad began to become even more abusive, so too did the odd occurrences in the home. Our family dog would frequently panic and bark or howl at nothing in the air, especially when in the basement. The paranormal events culminated in a few members of the family, not me though, seeing about a dozen entities, semi-translucent in appearance, and of ghastly appearance as well, surrounding the former stepdad while he was sitting in his chair one evening. In October of that year, around the same time the apparitions were seen, our family dog tragically died by being attacked by a pack of wild animals, either raccoons or coyotes, in the middle of the night. 2007 and 2008, they were pretty quiet years for the most part, and in 2009 the year opens pretty uneventfully, but activity starts ramping up big time in the spring and early summer. On my brother's birthday, in June of 2009, I lived at my grandparents' house with my family, and I was in the front yard waiting for the rest of the family to come out to the car to go for the birthday outings. About maybe 300 yards away, I see a young woman, wearing what looked like 1980s punk clothing, and her blonde hair in kind of a side ponytail, walking casually down the street and screaming for help. Her voice didn't sound normal though. It sounded much farther away than a mere 300 yards, and it also sounded kind of, I don't know, like dreamy almost. Fair enough, it wasn't a neighborhood with lots of houses and trees, and it was on a hill, so the acoustics weren't what sold it for me, but I immediately went inside and told everyone that there was a girl crying for help down the street. We got in the car and drove up and down the streets looking for her. Keep in mind too that it was midday, everyone else was still at work or school. This was literally a few days before summer vacation. So unless she was a resident, which she wasn't, it was a small neighborhood where everybody knew everyone and she didn't look familiar at all. It was unlikely that she could have just disappeared or gone somewhere before we reached her. I later learned that a young lady matching her description died of a drug overdose in the 1980s in that very neighborhood. That same month, in 2009, my family and I went to a cinema to see Monsters vs. Aliens, which had come out in March of that year and was still playing in the theaters in June. While my brother and I are watching the movie in our seats, my mum leaves with my sister to go to the restroom, and they come back sort of shaken and terrified. "What happened?" I asked after the movie. My mum and sisters then tell me that my mum had been picked up and thrown out of her shoes by an unseen force while walking down the hall. Apparently, when she got off the ground, she was 5 feet from where her shoes were, and they were still standing upright in the spot where she had been standing when she fell. Obviously, I wasn't there to confirm this, but still, with how shaken up they actually were, I do believe that something happened. For the years 2010 to 2011, I didn't live in Utah but had experiences elsewhere. 2012 was relatively tame and had little in the way of notable supernatural experiences. In 2013, I didn't live in Utah but had multiple experiences while living in Tennessee. And then the next Utah stories are, in April, I was staying for a few weeks with my grandparents, and my family and grandparents had gone out one day. They were having a fun day outing and doing some shopping or something. This is in the same neighborhood as the story from 2009, by the way, but knowing in our family history that Grandma's house had some strange activity, the previous owner of the house had actually been murdered, we all knew that there was something off about the house. Well, on one particular day, the vibe was particularly off. I was home alone, chilling out, and in no mood for ghosts, and I felt like there was just a very unwelcome and wrong presence in the house. I had a short temper that day, and told them to get lost and leave me the heck alone, and called them a series of horrible insults. I sat down to play guitar and unwind a bit, and then from like 30-ish feet away down the hallway, I heard a woman moaning coming from my grandma's room. I was home alone, and after hearing this noise, my blood just ran cold and I froze. Hello?" I managed to choke the word out in as stoic and friendly of a voice as I could muster, but there was no response. To keep myself from soiling my pants and running out of the house, I ended up just sort of scoffing and told myself, it's probably just the cat. My grandma had a tabby cat named Lottie at the time, who was one of my best friends. She later passed away in August of that year due to old age, but I had never before or since heard her cat, or any cat, make a noise like that. It was a human noise. I had an experience a few months back that I still can't shake, as well as other interactions. Maybe it was a dream, but I woke up to my husband yelling my name from downstairs. I yelled back, "What?" and he asked, "Are you going to work?" I reached for my phone and it was 1:20 in the morning. That was when I looked over and my husband was sleeping and snoring next to me. Around February, in my room putting clothes away, so fully awake this time, I heard my husband call my name from downstairs and I yelled back and said my name again. I searched the downstairs after he wouldn't respond, but there was no sign of him. I looked outside and I also saw that his vehicle was gone. Now recently, I was sitting on the couch with my son on my lap, husband sleeping on the other couch, one dog on my left, another one at my feet, when I heard a psst noise to call my cat on my left. Both dogs perk up and look towards it. My husband is still sleeping on my right. I woke him up and asked if he heard it, mostly for comfort I suppose, but I asked my son if he heard it too, but both say no. After that though, I did go through each room in the house and repeated that you are not welcome here, please get out. So far, all has been okay, but I'm still unsure of what I might have been dealing with, and I'm not sure that it's gone too. When my grandfather was young, he helped his father with his line of work, and he often worked in the woods, whether it be helping cut down trees or gathering wood. That's usually where he was. This particular day, they went to this secluded town. When they got there, my grandfather wanted to go and explore the woods a little bit while his father worked. He was warned not to go wandering off too deep into these woods because they were known to be a bit dangerous. However, that's exactly what he did. He ended up getting really lost because he wandered off too far in and he stumbled upon a body of water. Now, this is where it gets a bit weird, and when he told me what occurred here, I could see the absolute fear in his eyes. He told me that a creature, one that was tall and dark, walked out of the swamp. He said that it resembled a woman and had very long hair covering much of her distorted face. She also had a very dark complexion. Whatever it was, it walked out of the swamp and gripped his neck and started to choke him. Then it started to drag him into the water and drown him. He was freaking out obviously and begging for it to let him go. And eventually, either it did or he sort of slipped out. By the time that it let him go, he was hysterical though, crying and screaming. It was also nearing dark and somehow his father found him but was confused why his son was so wet. When they went back to town, he explained to the couple who were working with his father what occurred, and they said that they know of that creature. Apparently, a lot of people end up wandering far into those woods and end up dying. They die because that thing apparently drowns them, and my grandfather was very lucky that he was spared. Now, I know that this story might be a little bit difficult to believe, but that's fine. I mean, I believe it because of the look in my grandfather's eyes, who you could see fear in. He's also a very honest man, and I've never known him to be a liar. This all occurred in Morocco back in the 60s, in the northern part of the country. Back when I was a kid, my family and I lived in a pretty old house in Tennessee. The house was built in the 1920s, I believe. It was kind of shaped in a square. Think of a racetrack that you can go around. My sister and I's bedroom door was in the living room, and the hallway was to the left. I used to have reoccurring nightmares and sleep paralysis of a tall man with a hat coming down the hallway to my bedroom, and I would always wake up before he came into my room. Textbook sleep paralysis story, I know, but during summer, my mum would leave me and my 3 siblings home alone while she worked. She would come home tired, and since she low-key had a lot of kids, she didn't like us to immediately stampede her when she arrived home. So, one day, we're all sort of chilling in the living room watching TV while our mum was at work. We were just doing the usual. We heard our mum get home from work early that day, and we were pretty happy about that. We heard the back door open, and she came in talking to her friend on her Bluetooth. She always wore these black leather boots, and we heard them sort of clunking on the floor while she walked and talked towards us. When she was finally almost to the living room, she was at the end of the hallway where I told you guys earlier where I used to see the Shadow Man in my dreams. And you can probably guess that when we got up to greet her in that spot, she wasn't there. We were all pretty stunned by that at the time. My sister immediately called her, and you can probably guess again that she was still at work. I didn't tell my brother about the Shadow Man before, but when I did, he said that he had seen him too in the bathroom, which was in the same hallway. My mother also told me once that she used to hear my little brother calling her name when he wasn't even home. Honestly, I really hated that house. I'm sharing this because, well, I need to get it out. I've lived quietly with these experiences for like 8 years now. I'm 25 and I've had time to unpack what I believe I compartmentalized during a rough period of my life. So, I moved into this complex when I was 17, almost 18. I often disagreed with my godmother, who I lived with at the time, and so my best friend Sarah suggested that I move in with her family in their 3-bedroom apartment. It was by no means spacious, but in my young mind it was leaps better than the homophobia I was living with currently. Sarah's unit was one of the bigger and nicer ones, and I was already familiar with the complex, as her mother was assistant to the complex manager. We often spent the night in empty apartments neighboring hers. The empty units were already spooky to me as a teen, but even then I chalked it up to just the eerie vibe of a room with no furnishings. Now, there were a few things that were strange. One of the apartments had a doorbell that would ring at random times of the day and night, despite the doorbell system for the complex being broken and eventually even disabled. But that certainly could be chalked up to faulty wiring, so whatever, right? The other empty unit was more transient. People moved in and out frequently, so we spent less time in that unit, although I do have many fond memories of sleepovers there. When we did stay in that unit though, we were never able to get the family dog to come in. She would just stand in the doorway shaking. Although it was creepy, in my mind, she was just being a nervous dog, and I mean, labs can be weird like that. Anyway, when I moved in, I didn't realize how odd it was at first. Not for at least, maybe about 4 months. I was too caught up in the excitement of living with my best friend. I turned 18 and we spent most of our time out of the complex anyway, either at college or with friends. The time that I did spend at home, it was always lively, full of good food and smells and incense. I loved it. The first time I think I noticed something strange, I didn't really think too much of it at all. Banging came from the wall of the unit next to us, and I remembered complaining to Sarah that they were being awfully noisy. It was mid-afternoon though, and seeing as how it was new noises, I figured that someone had moved into the unit. The banging would continue through the weeks, but when it got too loud, Sarah and I would bang back and it would always quieten down. It would always stay quiet long enough to no longer be on the forefront of our minds, as we assumed that the neighbor got our message. I worked as a weekend and holiday receptionist at the time so that I could continue my schooling without stress. And for Thanksgiving, Sarah and her family chose to visit extended family. I was working, so I ended up staying home, and I had no apprehension about this whatsoever. In fact, I was sort of looking forward to it. I love alone time, as I am naturally a bit of an introverted person anyway. I have no issue being home alone. especially not when I had a dog and a cat to keep me company too. That day I went to work, came home, did my schoolwork, ordered pizza, and eventually I went to bed. When I woke up, it was to the cat yowling and hissing. I had left the lamp on in our room, but outside the window was pretty dark, so I knew it was still early morning. I didn't check what time it was, and honestly, as a dumb teenager, it didn't even occur to me to grab a weapon or assume somebody might have broken in. All I heard was the cat freaking out, and then I realized the dog too, low growling and snarling. I wasn't scared at first, just sort of confused. Then I rounded the hallway to face the living room, and suddenly the hair was raising on my arms. The cat was arched, yowling, staring at the dog. The dog had her ears back, fur raised, hunched as she growled at the corner of the living room. The way our unit was set up, the walls of the living room faced two areas, the empty hallway connecting all the apartments, and two windows that faced the balcony. I was sure that there was no one out there because I had left all the lights on and could see clearly out onto the porch. I told the dog to come and see, but she wouldn't even look at me. I asked her what was wrong, and she barked. I tried to touch her, calm her down, but she just growled even louder at that. Honestly, it freaked me out, and being home alone as a young teenage woman, I did the stupid, maybe smart I guess, decision to go back to bed and act like nothing had even happened. I left all the lights on after that, and the next morning, I felt comfortable enough to just laugh about it with Sarah on the phone. She agreed that it was strange, but we didn't have much else to say about it really. So, the unit across from us had two tenants move in during the time that I lived there. The first woman I didn't know. She would talk to Sarah's mother though, so through them I learned that she had been suffering horribly from sleep paralysis. It was an offhand comment she made one day, and honestly I didn't really think too much about it. Then the next tenant moved in. She had closer relations to Sarah and her younger sister. After a few months of living there, she quickly moved out though, experiencing boyfriend troubles. Not before mentioning to Sarah though that she had been experiencing sleep paralysis too, in the same back room, with a reoccurring nightmare she described as knowing something was behind the door but being frozen and unable to look. This is normal for sleep paralysis obviously, but the way that it was the same room and the way that the tenants had never known of each other, or talked even, it was very strange, and at this point I had lived in this complex long enough to start to feel a little bit uneasy, I guess. I was grateful that we only ever slept in the living room for all of those sleepovers, but the nail in the coffin to this particular unit happened about a month or so later. You see, Sarah and I were looking to move out. We wanted our own space, and we were debating on the unit across from us. At $800 in 2016, utilities paid, it was pretty much unbeatable. Sarah, though, more spiritual than I was, brought over a family friend who claimed to be sensitive one day, to test the place out. Sarah never once mentioned the last tenant's accounts to her, and the woman, she made two very disturbing comments in that unit. She called the living room a vortex of depression, her words, upon entering. And in the back bedroom, where both tenants had stayed, she claimed that she was unable to look at the entity behind the door. Sharing this even now still gives me chills, because how did she know that? I am the first to call hoax or scam to spooky accounts. Science and the human brain can do weird things, but this was just downright chilling. In the end, we didn't move into that unit. Now finally, one hot summer day, I was home with Sarah's younger sister watching TV. There was a knock at the front door to the complex, so I went out into the hall to greet a man in an official uniform and badge. He introduced himself as a detective, asked if Sarah's mother was around. I said no and asked if I should take a message. He said that he was investigating a reopened cold case from the 80s where a woman had been strangled in a unit here. The unit, right next to ours, touching walls with our bedroom. Apparently, the killer had hopped the border to Canada, and now that he was back in the US, they were hoping to get him. I relayed the message later and then asked who lived in that unit now. The banging on the walls, it never stopped, and I could hear movement in that unit, I swear to it. But Sarah's mum insisted that there was no tenant. I had no way of knowing this at the time, but the articles that came out later revealed that a woman had been taken hostage in her apartment, hog-tied with clothing, and then strangled. Her killer hopped the Canadian border and was caught killing another couple, which means that for over 10 months, I had been sleeping just mere meters from the echoes of a horrific murder scene. I hated that complex. I moved out about 3 months later with nothing much of note happening, but when I think back on it, I wonder about the area. The cold case of the strangled woman. The complex was right next to a bridge, which was so notorious for people jumping off that they installed a security fence 2 years after I moved out. The only time I ever lived in that area again, it was a rental house directly across the bridge. I had horrible night terrors there and moved out about 9 months later due to an abusive relationship. I've never felt any urge to go back to that complex, and when I spend too much time thinking about it, I always get a bit nauseous. Even halfway through sharing this, my hands are shaking. I've never experienced anything paranormal ever again, and honestly, I really don't want to either. I don't want to believe in ghosts, but whenever I go to proudly boast that, the memory of that complex literally haunts me and always makes me swallow my own words. This happened about 25 years ago, but I still think about it on a regular basis. At the time, my two boys were around 6 and 8 years old, and this happened in a small town about 20 miles from Skinwalker Ranch in the Uinta Basin, Utah. Having grown up there, I had more than a few personal experiences that still give me chills, but this event was beyond anything that I've experienced before or even heard about. My two boys slept in a bunk bed in a room just across the hall from my room. I was fast asleep one night when I was suddenly woken up by the most intense and terrifying screams from my boys, screaming and crying out for me. I jumped out of bed, obviously, grabbed my pistol from the top of my dresser, and threw open my door. Now, how do I say this? There in front of me, running out of my son's bedroom, was a 2 to 3 foot bright green creature. I have no idea what it was, but it looked at me as it exited their room and shot down the hallway, made a quick turn and shot down my basement stairs. Keep in mind, all of the lights were off, but this thing stood out, bright green in color with black patches on its face and body. I only got a quick look at it, but what my kids would tell me absolutely terrified me. I ran into their room and flipped on the light. There they were, both of them standing in the middle of the room holding their pillows. They were crying and screaming so hard that I couldn't understand what they were saying. My wife came in and began to calm them down while I went looking for whatever just ran down to my basement. I searched everywhere, every corner, every nook and cranny, but in the end I found nothing. I went back upstairs and asked my boys what had happened. Without going into great detail here, what they told me was horrifying. My youngest son told me that he woke up and noticed something green hunched over, standing in the doorway, just looking at him. He wasn't sure what it was, so he sat up, and when he did, this thing started grinning at him with big teeth, causing him to let out a scream, waking up my older son. While my younger son was telling me what he had seen, my older son spoke up and said, "It looked like Darth Maul, but green." If this sounds unfamiliar, Darth Maul is a Star Wars character. Look him up and you'll get an idea as to what this thing looked like. Just imagine a short, hunched-over Darth Maul, basically. Now, I guess out of fear, my youngest son grabbed his pillow and started hitting this thing, which had now moved into the room closer to them. He then tells me that it grabbed a hold of his pillow and started growling at him. This caused my older son to start screaming as well, and within seconds, he joined in with his pillow, hitting it over and over again, until it suddenly let go of the pillow, turned and started back towards the bedroom door. I think it must have heard me open my door or something, because this is about when I saw it, and like I said, I didn't get the best look at it, but it was bright green with black patches, and it moved extremely quickly, like way faster than any human can move. This event had a profound impact on my youngest son, because from this point forward, he would only sleep with his head covered, which always worried me. I had to sleep in their room for the next week or two before they would even go to sleep without me, in fact, and only with a lamp on in the room as well. Now, sounds hard to believe, I get it. Had I not seen it myself, I would have thought that they were imagining things. Seeing is absolutely believing. But was it a demon, a ghost, an alien, or something else entirely? I honestly don't have a clue, but I know that it wasn't human. We never did see anything again like that after that, but even today they still draw very similar pictures of what they saw that night, and while they don't like to talk about it with me, their descriptions, they've never changed. I had an experience with something very similar when I must have been about 8 years old, and I sometimes wonder if it was the same thing. What I can tell you is that this is absolutely real, a 100% true event, and the first time that I've ever shared it with anyone outside of my family. I obviously don't expect pretty much anyone to believe it, but what I'm telling you is that it is all true. When I was an angsty teenager, I moved in with my mother and stepdad to escape a, less than desirable situation. Because of the move, I was enrolled in a new school. This school was located in one of the sketchiest neighborhoods in the city. Everyone who resided in that area was relatively low income, my family included. We had a rec center near the school that was a hotspot for, let's call them undesirables, which was primarily teenage boys wandering over from the nearby high school to catcall the girls. Lunchtime was my favorite. I loved going outside for chow and having sweaty teenage boys ask for the nasty. Anyway, during my time at my terrible school, I made an array of friends. However, there was one person who became my best friend. Her name was Blondie. She and I got along like, what's a negative connotation? I was a people pleaser, I guess, and she took advantage of that. Blondie was nice enough, I suppose, but she was problematic. Regardless, we were fast friends and thus began our very short-lived friendship. Over the school year, she mainly came over to my house since I was an only child. We usually had the house to ourselves while my folks were at work. However, she finally invited me to her house around the middle of the school year. I was super excited. I'd always wanted to meet her family since they were all such an enigma. Blondie wasn't one to divulge information about her home life. All I knew was that she lived with her mother, stepdad, and younger sibling. I'm unsure if she was embarrassed or didn't care to share, but I finally had the honor of meeting them. Honestly, too, her family was amazing. They were kind and treated me really well. Not to mention her stepdad was a phenomenal cook, the best spaghetti and meatballs I'd ever had. After that, I started going to her house more, and you know what? I really enjoyed it. But fast forward to a month or two before the end of the school year, and it's Blondie's birthday. Her family was throwing a little get-together at their house, and I was invited. Blondie and we headed to her house after school, and it was a really fun time. Until near the end of the day. Now, I knew next to nothing about her biological father at this point. I knew that he wasn't really in the picture. He'd sometimes drop by and say hello, but I had never personally met him. That was until he had made a surprise visit to give Blondie a present. When I tell you that there was a shift in the atmosphere, I cannot stress just how much this was the fact. I could immediately feel it, and I was a dumb kid. We were inside the living room eating some cake, and there was a knock at the front door. Blondie's mum answered, and her face, which once had a nice smile, suddenly turned into a scowl. If looks could kill, man, that dude would be dead. She moved aside though, and this man walked in. I'll never forget how everyone in the room got tense, except for Blondie, who excitedly greeted her dad. At the time, he seemed like a normalish dude, I suppose. Maybe a tad bit on the creepier side, but who am I to judge? Blondie introduced me to her father, and we shared some pleasantries. At one point, I was invited to get some ice cream with them the following day, which I accepted. I was getting free ice cream. Of course I was going to say yes. He eventually left, and we all got back to eating cake. I had honestly forgotten about the visceral reaction everyone had upon seeing him. Who knows, too? Maybe if I had remembered, I would have said no. Anyway, the following day rolled around, and I went for ice cream with Blondie and her dad. I cannot remember much from that day, other than him asking me if I had a boyfriend or a girlfriend, which seems innocent enough, I suppose, but the way he asked it made me feel a bit weird. I honestly cannot remember much from any of the other encounters with this man. Nothing really jumps out to me. I know that I went out with him and Blondie a few more times before my family moved to another city, and we lost touch. Fast forward a few years, and I'm attending college. I had managed to stay in contact with one person from my middle school days. Her name was Teddy. She had reached out to me one day, asking if I wanted to go and see a movie, which I happily accepted. I was pretty deep into the big sad at that time, and I needed a pick-me-up. A film with an old friend was just what I needed, I thought. I took the train to a nearby mall, and Teddy and I watched the movie. After, we headed to the food court and we got some chow. We were catching up. It had been a couple of years since we last saw each other, when Teddy suddenly perked up. She asked me if I heard about Blondie's father, to which I said that we hadn't been in contact since I had moved. Teddy's face lit up, and she told me the most mind-blowing story my little brain had ever heard. She informed me that Blondie's father had murdered a woman, apparently. Now, before I continue, she was going based on word of mouth while she was telling me all of the details. Teddy had no news articles or police reports to back her story up. She was told by a friend who heard from someone else, apparently, and so on and so forth. But what she told me in the end wasn't actually far from the truth. According to her, Blondie's father had taken the life of a street worker. He got away with it for 2 years, and his truck got him caught. Apparently, there was something unique about it. Teddy couldn't tell me much more because she genuinely didn't know. I remember going back to my dorm and trying to Google for more details, but I couldn't find anything about it. I eventually forgot about the story until last year, and I was discussing the craziest stories from my life with a friend when I suddenly remembered Teddy's story. After some digging, too, I finally found an article that described the crime. I clicked on it, and when I saw the picture of the man, well, words cannot describe what I felt. Everything Teddy had told me was true, but it was so much worse than what she and I thought. Out of respect for the victim and her family, I won't describe what he did, but he was arrested 3 years after he had taken her life. I can't find any information about how he was caught, but it had something to do with his truck. He was charged with manslaughter. He took a plea bargain and indignity to a body and only served 7 years of his 14-year sentence. He had served half already because he was in custody during the trial. I looked him up again not too long ago, and I learned some unsettling information which prompted me to share this here. He was released from prison a few months ago, and guess what he did? He killed another woman. From what I've heard, it had similarities to the other murder he committed. This time around, he's charged with second-degree murder and indignity to a body. There's unfortunately still not a lot of information about the second woman, but Both of his victims were mothers. They both were cruelly taken from this world, and I still cannot wrap my mind around all of this. I mean, I met this monster. I was best friends with his daughter. I don't think I was personally in any danger, but the fact that I met someone capable of such heinous crimes, it honestly scares me. I can't even begin to imagine just how Blondie must have felt after learning of her father's crimes. Anyway, I apologize for being a bit vague regarding the crimes, but again, I don't want to disrespect these people. I know some of you really want to know everything, but it just didn't feel right to share their story, especially since it had little to do with me. I mean, I was just the schmuck that was friends with the daughter. Also, I would like to provide more information about how Blondie is, but I cannot remember her last name for the life of me. She doesn't share the same one as her dad, so I really have no way of finding her or contacting her. But regardless, if you've made it this far, then thanks for listening. When I was still knee-high-ish, my grandmother, Tilly, and I used to go on yearly road trips either across our own country or the one next to ours. We live relatively close to the border. Well, on this particular occasion, we decided to travel across our neighboring country. Let's call my home country A and the neighboring country B. My grandmother had a friend in the more yeehaw part of the country B that she hadn't seen in a minute, and after some planning, they figured out the best time for the two of us to make our trip. I was really excited when my grandmother first told me about the trip. I had no idea where we were going, but the idea of going on a road trip with Gram was really exciting. I fast forward a few months and we finally hop in the car and head off on our merry way. The trip would take about a week, and my grandmother wanted to see all the neat stuff along the way. Traveling with a child such as myself required a lot of pit stops as well. I wasn't necessarily a bad traveling companion, but I just had a small bladder at the time. Anyway, we were on the last stretch of the trip when my grandmother had to pull into a gas station to fill up. We were practically running on fumes at this point, and I really had to go to the bathroom. We pulled into this middle of nowhere gas station, and after my grandmother had filled up the car, we hurried inside so I could empty my bladder. And the moment that we walked inside, all the alarm bells in my tiny brain suddenly went off. I had no idea why I was feeling the way I was, up until I set eyes on the clerk. Now, I'm not usually one to judge a person by how they present themselves, but old boy, what I'll be calling him from here on out, looked like he walked straight out of a serial killer documentary. Currently, we're smack down in the center of yeehaw territory, in the middle of nowhere, and this man looks like he should be selling you high-end cars, not working at a rundown gas station. Old boy was giving me all kinds of bad vibes. I really don't know how to explain it other than that as well. But worse still, he was already smiling a little too widely when he spotted my grandmother. She was petite, blonde, and beautiful. Granted, I'm a bit biased, but she is my grandma. However, when he saw me, you could have sworn he was looking at a Sunday dinner. Somehow, his already very wide grin only grew. Remembering it, even to this day, gives me the heebie-jeebies. Thankfully, Gram could sense a disturbance in the force and shielded me from this predatory gaze. She paid for the gas and asked for the key to the washroom, which he took his sweet time getting. She walked with me to the bathroom, which was disgusting by the way, and I quickly did my business and we returned the key with great reluctance. But here is where things got progressively worse. When we were piling back into the car, old boy closed down the shop and got into his car. It doesn't seem too weird, right? Sure, he was super creepy, but he hasn't done anything too odd yet. Now, technically, we had 2 days left on the trip. My grandma would drive in increments. 4 hours on the road, an hour off to explore, fill up, etc. Then we'd find an inn or a motel, and we'd spend the night. We traveled about maybe 8 hours a day before turning in for the night. And well, when we left the gas station, old boy followed us for, I kid you not, the rest of the entire trip. At first, we just assumed that he was heading in our general direction. It was just the one road after all. But after the third turnoff and old boy was still tailing us, my grandmother finally realized that we were being followed. This man then proceeded to follow us for, and I wish I were joking, 12 hours. My grandmother refused to stop driving unless it was absolutely imperative. For anyone wondering why she didn't just call for help or why she didn't pull into a police station or something, don't worry, you're not the only one. To be perfectly fair to my grandmother, she didn't have a phone, and despite somewhat knowing where she was, it was still pretty much unknown territory. She wanted to get to a familiar surrounding, so there wasn't the risk of getting lost, I think, and we finally made it to the city where her friend resided, and that's when we pulled into a police station. The mad lad pulled up next to our car, just as we headed inside the building as well, and watched us. I don't know what old boy was taking, but he sat there while my grandma talked with the lovely lady at the desk. Thankfully, the cops handled the creepy man with ease, but I'll never forget that smile that never left his face while he was being escorted away. Needless to say, that was the last time that we road tripped to Country B, and one of the last times that we actually took a road trip in general. So, the other day, leaving my friend's house, I accidentally backed into a brick mailbox. My bike rack hit the mailbox, so my car was okay, but completely demolished the mailbox. No big deal though, right? That's why we have insurance. I went to the neighbor and told them what happened and gave them my insurance details, phone number and name. All I got was his first name, but from the get-go, this dude was pretty creepy. He kept hitting on me, trying to date me, specifically trying to feed me. I left on my drive to my mum's. I'm attending out-of-state college and parents are divorced. And the guy I backed into, Robert, began to text me and call me. He was insistent that it was better for both of us to just pay out of pocket for the mailbox, sending me links to companies that could fix it for like $500, and demanding that I go on a date with him so I could give him the cash for the repair and he could feed me. I don't know what his deal with food was, but I declined everything but started to get annoyed by his constant texts and calls. Finally, after 2 days of it, with my responses only, "Please contact my insurance," I sent him a text saying that he was harassing me at this point. I blocked him, but he made a new number and threatened to report it as a hit and run to the police. I'm in law school, okay, and this was not a hit and run. I blocked the second number, and then he used a new number to ask me if I wanted him to send a screenshot or a video of the accident to his insurance. I admit, this made me angry. I called this number and dug my nails so hard into my thigh that I drew blood as he threatened reporting things, asking me on a date, and trying to entice me to just pay cash. I finally screamed at him to get lost and to never contact me again. My dad heard me and was upset that I said that to someone that I was in an accident with, and that I said that to a guy who thought that I was cute and just wanted a date. And then I blocked the third number. Next day, he reaches out again to tell me that I gave him the wrong policy number. I told him that I didn't, but he then said that it would be easier to pay cash, that I was the problem, etc. He was talking to his insurance, I guess, and began trying to validate my info. He had my mum's name, address, and phone number. I verified it, told him to not contact me again, and blocked his new number. The next morning, super early, I get a text basically saying that he finished the claim and I was awful for making it harder than it needed to be by going through insurance and not going on a date with him. He then included, "You're so beautiful and ugly at the same time. Don't take risks. Stay on the good path. Goodbye." At this point, I got a little bit scared, because this was the fifth number that I had to block. Then at midnight, he texts me, "Are you up? I know where you live. Don't try and screw me over on insurance. I'll report you as a hit and run. You should have just gone on the date with me." I took the phone to my dad, showed him the text, and I filled him in. My dad, a pretty scary dude, then calls the guy, He answered, "Shoot, I knew you were into me, but do you want to come over?" My dad got pretty mad at that. He said that he was going beyond harassment, that this was his final warning to not contact me, that he didn't care how he reported it, etc. Robert began saying that I came on to him and offered sex as payment, invited him to my house and was horny or whatever. Instantly, we blocked him, police were contacted, insurance was notified, all that stuff. Next day, I talked to insurance, protective order was filed, got another text telling me that I shouldn't have involved police, blocked the 7th number, notify police, go to stay at my dad's place because dude doesn't have this address. But my dad is a very tall and very scary dude who loves his Second Amendment. But late last night, watching Star Wars with my dad and older brother, the doorbell rings. Dad goes to see who it was, and I kid you not, it was Robert with a trash bag filled with things that I apparently left at his house. At this point, I call the police. My dad goes ballistic, all the things. Police came and they arrest the guy. The bag? Well, it was filled with lingerie, a knife, lip balm, and a Dieter Von Tess fetish book. I just met with an attorney and, plot twist, the guy doesn't own the house. He is actually an illegal immigrant, is married, and is also being deported. I feel awful that he's being deported, but I genuinely think that he wanted to, well, assault me or perhaps kill me or something. I go back to school in a few days and I'm actually pretty terrified that he or someone else will follow me there. I think that my house is haunted. The first instance I had was, I was probably like 13 at the time. We had just moved into my house and my family went out to eat, but I didn't really want to since it was late and I don't like eating too late. This means that it was just me in the house. I was sitting down on the sofa with my cat watching a movie when, out of nowhere, I heard a man's voice behind me say, "Here, kitty, kitty." My cat didn't seem to acknowledge it, but I heard it clear as day, and when I turned around, obviously nobody was anywhere to be found. The second instance, I probably was about the same age. I had what I believed to be a trickster demon of some sort around, as I would trip over seemingly nothing and hear laughter right next to me. I would also place things down in my bedroom, only to find them gone, nowhere to be found when I went back for them. Obviously, my first instinct was that my siblings, that they had taken them, but nobody had gone into my bedroom besides me. Eventually, I would just say, "Could you put my item, whatever it was, back here, please? Thank you." And suddenly, when I would walk out of the room and walk back, it would be back exactly where it was before. The third instance, probably about a year or two later, so I was maybe 14 or 15. I was going to go up the mountains behind my house for a hike, but it was dry season, so all the prickly bushes and such were all over the hill. I turned to go back home, and as I'm walking back, I hear indistinct talking and then what sounds like somebody muttering through a megaphone. It sounded like they were right in front of my house. Definitely would have been heard from inside, so I ran inside and asked my mother what all that noise was, but she was like, "What noise?" The fourth instance, about 3 months ago, so I'm 18 at the time, my grandfather had gotten sick in another country and wasn't doing too great. My mother had this weird feeling that he was lost, and I had gone into the den of my house and started pacing a little bit because I have anxiety and that's just what helps me not to panic. As I'm walking, I see out of the corner of my eye somebody following me. Feet behind mine, glimpses of a face when I turn, but only ever out of the corner of my eye, never fully in sight. And upon seeing that, I booked it because that was just way too much. Now, the fifth instance was about a week ago, actually. My mother, sister, and I, coincidentally the only people in my house that believe in the supernatural, were standing near the fireplace talking about whether or not my mother was going to buy my grandfather's ashes from the funeral home in another country. when all of a sudden, we heard a loud bang on the wall, and my mother's mailbox, where she keeps letters and bills and such, suddenly fell to the floor. Mind you, that thing was nailed into the wall. I mean, there's absolutely no way that it could move. But the only things that fell out were her checkbook, a pen, and a few old credit cards. We all looked at each other, and I guess my grandfather really wanted her to pay for him, after all. So, I've just moved into this house with my husband almost a month ago. Nothing really started happening that caused any concern for either of us. Until recently, this past week, that is. To start, on Monday, I heard what sounded like light tapping against the wall and what I think was meowing. Logically speaking, I thought maybe it was just the cold that caused the tapping and that the meowing came from outside on the shed next to the house. That is, until I actually thought about it. You see, the meowing sounded like it was actually in our bedroom, in the middle of the night, mind you. On Tuesday, I get the most uncomfortable feeling of being watched, even though I'm alone and my husband is at work. The feeling of even being chased up the stairs. At night, it was like something had hit the trash bag downstairs, and then it sounded like something running up. On Wednesday, I woke up at night from a noise of some kind. It sounded like someone was slamming the edge of a credit card or something on my bathroom counter, which is just outside of my bedroom door. This continues for like 30 to 40 minutes until suddenly it just stops. I peek into the hallway just to make sure that I'm not hearing things and possibly seeing things either. But after that, the sound of something heavy fell into the trash can and started rummaging around again. And today, Thursday, possibly one of the creepiest things that has happened so far, and I know that I'm not going crazy. So, my husband and I were downstairs making breakfast, and I was telling him about what had happened last night. While we were talking, we both went quiet, and I looked at him as if I was terrified because it was the sound of the credit card again, but this time it was in the coat closet, not in the bathroom. Fast forward a few hours when he goes to work, and the sound of somebody slamming into my downstairs bathroom takes place. Then came the knocking, around 5 of them. Not continuous, but definitely semi-frequent. I've been extremely jumpy since all of this started happening, and honestly, I just don't know what to do. So, I work pretty late most nights, and sometimes when I need something right away, I have no choice but to go to this store that's the only one open late after work. So, I was driving home and noticed a car behind me super close with their lights really bright. I thought that it was a cop at first, but made a turn and no, it was a small black sedan. Okay, that's a bit weird. I kept going my usual route and start noticing this car's flashing their brights behind me over and over again while following me my whole route home. I know that I didn't drop anything because all I brought in the store were my keys and phone for Apple Pay. The trunk wasn't open or anything either. I was seriously getting weirded out, so I made a fast turn and started going 60 on this back road that I didn't even care about cops anymore. In fact, I actually wanted to be pulled over at this point. And well, this dude was right there behind me, going 60 as well, still flashing his beams. Finally, after about 10 minutes of this, there were these cops in the road doing construction, directing traffic when I looked back and he turned off right away. I have no idea what just happened, but something tells me that whatever it wasn't good. I've had my fair share of dealing with creeps and weirdos in life. Some encounters are not as serious, but creepy nonetheless. But a few years ago, when I was living in Los Angeles, California, I lived next door to a mortuary. Tons of creepy energy from here alone. and right behind my house was a halfway house full of ex-cons, drug addicts, alcoholics, etc. The house was 2 stories and overlooked my backyard. They would play loud rock music early in the mornings, and some of them would sit in the window upstairs to smoke as well. There was one guy in particular, though, who smoked a lot. Almost every other hour, I would see him taking drag after drag from his cigarette, watching my backyard intently. He looked sort of young, I guess, maybe early 30s. He had greasy black hair that I guess he attempted to cut and tidy up somewhat, and scabs or marks all over his colorless face. He also wore black thick-rimmed glasses. He had a deranged sort of psychotic energy, but he wasn't aggressive by any means. Hard to describe. I'm not one to judge anyone in his position, but the way that he would always watch my house and anyone that would come outside to the backyard, it was disturbing to say the least. After a while, I would stop coming out back. He would always be up there, wild, unblinking eyes watching me as I walked around. He never spoke or made a sound, he just sort of watched. One day, though, I was watching movies with my family in the living room. The living room of that house led into the backyard. There was a window behind one of our couches that faced directly outside. We had the blinds and the windows open, and it was a warm night, sometime in the summer. I was sitting on the couch with the window directly behind me when I thought that I heard something outside, but I wasn't sure. For some reason, I turned around to look out the window, though, and there he was. He was shirtless. I could see scabs all over his upper torso. His eyes were wider than normal. They had a sort of sick, perverted look to them. There was no cigarette or smoke that I could see. His hands were down, out of view. I think he was even nodding his head a little bit, but we stared at each other for a short few seconds before I abruptly closed the blinds and silently continued to watch the movie. I don't think that my family noticed this, and to be honest, I don't know why I didn't speak up, but I had trouble sleeping that night, knowing that he was still over there. Luckily, I don't live in that neighborhood anymore. So, I'm from California, but me and my family lived in Atlanta for about 2 years, from 15 to 17 years old. The entire time living there was, well, a saga within itself, but I can remember one specific incident that was very unsettling. When we arrived in Atlanta, we stayed in a hotel for some months looking for a place to live. There was this handyman who worked at the hotel. He was a white man, maybe in his 40s, large belly, wore glasses, and always dressed in the same camouflage jack that kind of made him resemble a hunter of some sort. He seemed friendly enough. He would always wave and joke around with all the kids and with my parents, and we were very cordial with him. His friendliness started to become a bit excessive towards the end of our stay, though. It got to the point where he would yell up to us from outside of our window. We would call back to him and laugh with him, make light of the situation, but it became uneasy for us when he kept doing it, night after night, patrolling the parking lot. At one point, we just ignored him and turned the light out as if we weren't there. But he became even more aggressive, shouting to us and shining a huge flashlight in our window, whistling up to us and joking about how he knew we were still up there. He had a weird sort of high-pitched laugh mixed with his southern accent that didn't sound like he was playing around. It was more sinister, if anything. It was sort of sadistic, in a Pee Wee Herman kind of way. Hard to describe, but I can't remember everything he said specifically, but there was a comment that he made about us one time that made my father very uneasy. He compared him to someone on Unsolved Mysteries. There were little things that he said about all the kids as well, like how cute we were or something to that effect that never sat well with any of us. It came to a breaking point though one day when we went downstairs to our car and saw a hangman figure drawn in the dust on the back of the window. I'm mixed, as are my siblings. My dad is black and my mum is mixed race. We're in the middle of Atlanta, Georgia, the deep south, in a very awkward position. We're totally new to this state. I've never left the West Coast before that point in my life, and this image creeped everyone in my family out. We knew that he was the one who did it too. My dad confronted him about it, and he played it off, denied that he meant anything by it, and apologized profusely. But the way that he did it was in the same weird, joking manner that he talked to us with, so it was very hard to take it seriously. This, and the fact that this hotel was robbed at gunpoint in the same week, motivated us to leave immediately. I never did see this man again, though we had many other insanely creepy experiences down south, and after a while we ended up just coming back to California and we never looked back. I have hundreds of stories from my father about paranormal encounters that he's had, but he has two of them concerning what I believe to be skinwalkers. Both of these take place in the southeast during the late 80s or 90s. To begin with, my dad is Native American and spent a lot of his childhood and early adulthood out in the middle of nowhere. Now, the first one, my dad was walking around in the woods of a reservation with his friends. His friends were back at the car. He was walking about 50 feet away from them when he saw another native man behind a bush, but he could immediately feel that something was wrong with him. The guy had no clothing as far as he could see, no jewelry or makeup or anything distinguishing. His hair was pulled back into a ponytail. They held eye contact for a long time. He said it felt like hours, but was in reality probably less than a minute and a half. He was sort of temporarily frozen with fear as well. He called for his friends, but none of them came. He turned to face them, then he looked back and the man was just gone. Within seconds, noiselessly. No sign that there was anyone there at all to begin with. The second, though, is definitely a lot closer to what most people think of when they hear about skinwalkers. My dad was out in a secluded forest when he heard a piercing scream very close by. He described it as a mix of a native throat cry, the sort of ah-yah sound, sort of mixed with that feral cat or hurt bird sort of sound. They brushed it off the first time, but then they heard it a second time. It was just as close as it had been before, despite them moving. They decided to get out of there at that point. It was deafening and about 10 seconds long, he said. It happened about 3 times as they were leaving, never once sounding any farther away or any closer. When I was 18 to 19, I was living on my own for the first time. As a freshman in college, our days consisted of going to class in the mornings, then getting Chipotle, then going back to the apartment and smoking weed for the rest of the day or night. It was nearly every single day that we did this. Actually, no, not even nearly. That was literally exactly what we did every single day. Me and my roommate, his name was James, had a close friend from high school who would stay with us often. His name was Tyler. Tyler would come over to smoke at our apartment pretty regularly, since we had a safe place to do it away from his parents' house where he was living at the time. One night, Tyler was over and we were smoking per usual, and decided to go walk around the apartment complex. It wasn't late, maybe 8 p.m., but as we were walking, a pair of guys who looked to be a little older than us approached and asked us if we had any weed. James, the dullard of the group, immediately said something along the lines of, "Yeah, we could get you some." Tyler and I were already in the process of saying no when he said that to them, as we lived in a state where you actually had to be really careful about weed. Next thing we know, James has invited the 2 guys into our apartment to smoke with us, and this despite our discontent. Remember too that we're 18 and 19 at the time, high and just as stupid as anyone could be. Anyway, the 2 guys come into the apartment, we smoke, and the whole time they're just being sort of weird. One of the guys keeps making jokes that he's an undercover cop, saying stuff like, "Notice how I'm not inhaling all the way?" Undercover cops can smoke weed, but as long as they don't inhale, then it's fine. Now, in retrospect, these guys were just a little older than us and were totally messing with us by saying stuff like that. But it freaked Tyler and I out a lot. So much so that after the two guys left, we insisted on going and hiding our bags of weed before the inevitable police raid rained down on us. A quick disclaimer here, I know that we were stupid for actually thinking that they were cops, but we didn't know any better at the time. We were paranoid, and all we could think about was the possibility of getting a misdemeanor weed conviction, which carried a $1,000 fine and a 1-year probation. Well, those two guys do not end up being the creepy part of the encounter. You see, Tyler and I, in a state of weed-induced paranoia, decided to go and hide our backpack full of weed in the woods outside of the apartment complex until we could confirm that our apartment would not be raided. By this point, it's probably about 1:30 in the morning. We set off on our journey into the woods, hide the weed, and identify a few landmarks to ensure that we can find it again. Because, Lord forbid, we lose even an ounce of weed, right? We feel a lot better after hiding the evidence, and set back towards the apartment. We re-enter the complex and are walking along jovially towards my unit. As we're rounding the corner to my building, I then hear the sound of pant legs of athletic pants sweeping together as if somebody is running. No, sprinting up behind us. Before we can even turn around, we hear a deep voice yell from behind, "Get on the ground." I turn around long enough to see a masked man pointing a pistol right at us. We both immediately hit the deck as he screams at us to give him all of our money. Needless to say, we were 18 years old and weren't exactly carrying large amounts of cash on us. But we emptied our pockets, although all we had were our cell phones and empty wallets. He became increasingly angry and told us to get up and face away from him. Now, this was obviously already a scary situation, but this is when it got extremely terrifying for both of us. Just a couple of days before this, 2 teens had been brutally murdered in our area in the same fashion, forced to face away from their killer, and ultimately shot execution style in cold blood. And they hadn't caught the guy yet. It was all either of us could think about in that moment, as it was a highly publicized crime that everyone in our area had heard about. I know that I'm totally outing my general location right now, but I know people are going to want to know what case I'm referring to. Plus, neither of us live in that area anymore, or even that state. So look up Jeffrey Hazelwood murders online for more context. But there is a happy ending to this, because the guy proceeds to instruct us to walk. He walks behind us all the way to the exit of the apartment complex, and as we exited, we heard the sound of running again, this time away from us. We slowly turn around and realize that he's gone. But we were still so freaked out that we kept walking and called a friend to come and pick us up from a nearby Waffle House. To this day, I'm really glad that only psychologically rather than physically, we were harmed by that ordeal that night. Oh, and by the way, we went back to the woods first thing the next morning and picked up the backpack in order to continue our era of stoner degeneracy. This happened about 3 years ago, but I still think about it from time to time, and it still creeps me out. So, I, a 21-year-old male at the time, had just moved into a new apartment on the first floor of a building. It was late one night, and my roommate was out when somebody knocked on the door. This was not uncommon, as we were in college, and my roommate had friends that would come by to hang out at all hours of the day. I just figured that it was one of his friends, so I get up and I check the peephole. Staring right back at me through the peephole is an eyeball pressed against it, though. Again, though, this is also something that one of our friends might do, just to be funny. I sort of chuckled and opened the door, surprised to see a guy in his mid-20s that I didn't recognize. He was strange as well, to say the least. He was very hyper almost, and immediately launched into a door-to-door salesman type pitch. I can't remember exactly what he was even selling, but It was something about the local university, which I also attended at the time. The whole time he was talking, he kept looking past me into the apartment. He was fidgeting and even standing on his tiptoes to see inside. Still, I just thought the guy was weird and nervous and might not even be all there or whatever. I politely declined to buy anything from him, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. I finally had to be pretty stern in telling him that I wasn't interested. He finally accepted defeat, and as I was closing the door, he put his hand out and stopped the door from closing. Before I can be like, "What the heck, dude?" he smiles at me and says, "I like Mario Kart on Nintendo 64 too." Now, me and my roommate had been staying up late into the night playing Mario Kart 64 in my bedroom for like the past several days before that. But there was nothing that he could see from the apartment entrance that had anything to do with Mario Kart. I was taken aback by that, and trying to add things up in my head, and confusingly asked, "How do you know I play Mario Kart?" He then got super nervous and said, "Oh, I just thought anyone with a couch like that would be into Mario Kart on the Nintendo 64, because, you know, it's like a retro game and that's a retro couch." I mean, what the heck sort of explanation is that, right? Then he was like, "Oh, okay, bye," and literally scurried away. I shut the door and I locked it. I start trying to put the pieces together on how he could have known that, because obviously it wasn't because of my grandma's old couch. Remember too that it's a first floor apartment that backed up to the woods. My roommate got home shortly after that, and I immediately tell him about the encounter. He was freaked out too, and so we started investigating. At first, it seemed as if there was no way to even see inside my bedroom. I mean, my blinds were always down. We went outside and tested it and found that the only way to see inside would have been if you had your face right up against the window, and even then you kind of had to crouch and close one eye just to get a glimpse of the inside. A couple more creepy details as well is that my window was over a balcony, and the Nintendo 64 console itself was stored inside of the TV stand. It wasn't even visible, which means that you'd only be able to see while we were actively playing, which we never did until we were a little bit stoned and it was like 2 a.m. So basically, this creep had been jumping the railing to our balcony, pressing his face against my window, and watching us play Mario Kart in the middle of the night for who knows how long. I never did see that guy again, but needless to say, I was pretty paranoid for a while after that. I constantly checked my windows and woke up in the middle of the night paranoid that he was standing just a couple of feet away, watching me sleep. It was just a very unsettling encounter, I guess. I'm glad that nothing more ever really came of it and that I never saw him again, but I have always wondered exactly what his motives were. When I was really little, from ages 1 to 5, we lived in a small mountain town in the middle of nowhere. It was the kind of town that truckers would stop at for a bite to eat, the kind of town that you'd pass through on your way to somewhere else. We had moved into our house shortly after I was born, and the woman who had lived there previously swore that the house was haunted. I never really put pieces together until I got older, I guess, but the woman had apparently claimed to hear children playing and laughing in the basement, but nobody was ever there. My family, being skeptical, didn't think too much of those claims, but a couple of strange occurrences would say otherwise. So when I was about 3, I would sit in the kitchen eating my meals, and in my line of sight was the hallway. My mum claims that I would always stop what I was doing, stare into the hallway and just point and repeatedly say "horsey," and then go back to eating my food like nothing had happened. She always got chills when I did that, apparently. A story from that house that my parents like to tell is about a remote control car that they bought me as a gift. Every night when I was in bed, they would put my toys away, which included putting the remote control car next to the fireplace in the living room. They would sit down to watch TV, and out of nowhere, the car would take off on its own. They always nervously put it back in its place. This became a regular occurrence, and at one point, they got fed up with it, took the batteries out of the car and the remote. They put the car back in its place and sat down to watch TV again. And yet again, that car took off on its own. They ended up returning the car to the shop that they had gotten it from, claiming that it was faulty. Since I was so young, I don't remember these two previous stories, but there is one thing that I do clearly remember from that house. As a kid, I would often be playing on my own as I was an only child. On a few of these occasions, clear as day, I would hear a woman's voice from right behind me. She never scared me, but she always stopped me in my tracks, and I would sit there for a moment contemplating if I'd actually heard someone speaking to me. The strange thing is that she would always repeat the same thing in the same tone, but it wasn't English, and I could never replicate what she was saying. To this day, I still vaguely remember what she sounded like. This wouldn't only happen at the old house, though. I remember it happening at my grandmother's place on one occasion as well, but it was always the same voice. We moved when I was 5, and I remember it happening once after that. And to this day, I've never ever heard that voice again. I've been on the fence about these experiences as I just cannot explain them. There's probably a reasonable explanation for some of them, but as they started happening more frequently, it became kind of a commonly discussed topic between me and my co-workers. So for context, I worked at a pet store. The store was quite large, and the building was decently old. I was frequently put on the closing shift, which meant that it was just me and one other person for the last hour in the store. The last half an hour was always closed to customers, as we used that time to clean up and count the tills and all that. We'd always heard little thumps around the store that sounded similar to footsteps, but I always brushed that off as the ventilation and the animals in the store. Me and my one co-worker, Amy, would always joke about the place being haunted. Things started getting less explainable, though, when my manager told us one of her experiences. One day we were short-staffed, so it was just 4 of us running the store. Me and the other 3 were all up near the cash register, and my manager was in her office. The bathroom and the office are right next to each other, and you can hear pretty clearly any conversation being held in the office from that bathroom. My manager had gone into the bathroom, and when she came out, she came up to the cash register and asked if anyone had just been in the office. Obviously, we hadn't. She looked concerned, though, and told us that she had heard someone talking to her dog and calling his name, but there had been nobody in the office at the time with him. That was when things really started getting strange, too. Not long after that, we had switched to holiday hours, so me and Amy had to stay in the store for an extra hour and a half alone. That was fine, though. I mean, we always had fun as barely anybody would come in, so we would honestly just chat, buy snacks, and just hang out around the store. But one night, we decided to do a little ghost hunt. We, as a joke, started using the TikTok filter, which shows a person's silhouette. The filter was supposed to detect somebody and turn them into a character or whatever. But if you took pictures of empty spaces, sometimes it would show a silhouette without anybody being in the shot. We messed around with that for a little while, and took some pictures which showed 2 faceless people standing in the aisle in front of us. It spooked us a little bit, but neither of us really believed the filter. A little bit later, we were in an aisle facing the groomer's room. She was messing around on her phone with the filter, and I was sitting on a pallet of dog food in the aisle. The grooming room had a glass window, so you could see into the room pretty clearly. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a blackish-grey circular orb quickly float down from the top of the corner of the grooming room and disappear halfway down. It was very quick, and I wasn't quite sure what I had seen, so I didn't mention it to Amy. We sat there in silence for a couple of moments, and she broke the silence with, "Did you just see that?" I was still skeptical, so I asked her what she had seen, and she said that it was some kind of grey orb. I got chills and quickly got 2 pieces of paper from the till and said, "Okay, I'm going to draw what I saw, and you draw what you saw, and we'll compare after." We drew the same odd shape that we had seen, and for the rest of the night, we were pretty spooked. I'm not sure if there's an explanation for that, but it definitely had us both a bit scared. The only other thing that happened in that store was when the power went out and we were all stuck waiting for it to come back on with the store closed. We had quickly run out of work to do, so we were all sort of hanging out with the manager goofing around. We decided to open up one of the UV lights that we had on the shelf and look around the store for fun. The flashlight didn't have any batteries, so me and the manager went back into the office to get some. When we went into the office, we heard a distinct banging in the ceiling, which stopped us both. The power had been out for a couple of hours at that point, so we didn't know what we were hearing. We both stood there for a second listening to it. She spoke up asking me, "What is that?" and the noise abruptly stopped. We didn't hear it again after that, and we grabbed the batteries and went back out into the sales floor. I guess I just wanted to share my experiences at my old job, as weird as they are. The activity became really quiet when Amy quit for some reason. I'm not sure if it was because we were messing around and calling it out, but I definitely was scared to be in that store alone from that point on. The year was 1999. I was a 10-year-old kid living with my mother, brothers, and stepfather in a small, humble house in Santana da Parnaíba, Brazil. We had been living there for just over a year. For context, to this day, our home and the other houses in that street stays only in one side. The other side, there's a big, huge Atlantic forest reserve, and there's a quarry inside of it as well. Today, there's a tall wall that separates this forest from the rest of the neighborhood, but in that year, this wall didn't exist yet. Also, the street was pretty muddy, but there was no asphalt at that point. And that street was a bit far from the rest of the neighborhood as well. If you go down the street, you'll need to walk like 200 meters, turn right and take a street that will lead to the other streets, or just walk straight for almost 1 kilometer in an empty road with no houses, just trees and bushes to reach the other neighborhood. If you go up that street, you would find other houses, but always side by side on the same side. My mum's house was the first one, or the last depending on the direction, of that street. So, one night I was sleeping in my room along with my brothers. My stepfather and mum were in their room, and they heard a loud, heavy and slow steps on the ground, far away from outside the house, coming probably from that empty road. The sound was heard pretty far away, but it came closer and closer, one step at a time, slow, almost like an elephant on 2 legs. When the sound reached the house, these strange footsteps then began to climb the outside wall, as there was no wall separating the house from the street at that point. The steps kept the same pace, and they didn't slow even when climbing that wall, as if it, whatever it was, could walk up the wall unaffected by gravity. The house vibrated with each step, and that was when I woke up. I heard the last few steps on the wall, and then it started walking along the slab, keeping the same slow pace until, whatever it was, stopped at the top of the stairs that gives access to the slab, and these stairs led to what was the living room at that time. To get access to the slab, there was a type of door made with a wooden frame and asbestos tiles at the top of the stairs, and from inside the house it was closed with a bolt and a padlock. And it was at those steps that it stopped. Then things started to diverge a little bit here. I was listening in my bed, without understanding what was going on obviously, and after 3 or 4 seconds of silence, I heard a loud metallic noise rolling down the stairs, almost like someone had thrown a lot of tin cans down there. But my mum and my stepfather said that they heard a loud, heavy thing rolling down, almost like a dead body or something. My mum and stepfather ran out of the room as they thought that someone was inside the house, or maybe one of us kids had fallen down the stairs or something. I was in my bed scared when they entered my room, and I asked what was happening. They said that they didn't know. After checking under my bed, I couldn't help but be curious, and I went to the living room, and there I saw that the access to the slab was still locked, and there was no cans or body on the stairs or anything. Also, there were no steps away from the place. After that sound, everything just went silent, and the steps never went away or never seemed to move or anything. My stepfather grabbed a flashlight and we got up the stairs to check. Everything seemed to be in place though, except for our dog. Our dog was crying and was completely curled up, stuck and motionless on its own chain outside the house that was underneath our water tank. Our dog seemed to be absolutely terrified by whatever that was, which was very out of character. We never did see anything like this before or after that day. My mother and stepfather still live in the same house, but it's renovated at this point and completely different from that time. I know it's a weird story, and look, I know I don't have any proof or anything like that, but I know what I heard. If you've listened to this, then thanks for listening, and I hope you at least found it interesting, regardless of whether you believe it or not. I want to assure you, though, that it's a true story, and it's something that I still scratch my head about. This happened about 10 years ago now. My friend Craig and we had made some plans to go hang out with our friend Jeremy and his new girlfriend. Neither of us had to work the next day, so we grabbed some beers and made our way to Jeremy's mum's apartment complex where Jeremy was temporarily staying. When we got there, we went out into the woods behind the apartment complex to drink. This wasn't just a little patch of trees or anything, but a huge, good-sized patch of forest. For context, this was in the New York State, and it was a nice fall day late afternoon. The sun was still out. We finished the beers, and we decided to go get more. So we go to the store and get some more beer, head back to the apartments, and enter the woods. This was autumn, like I said, and the light outside was right at that stage where it starts to very quickly fade. We underestimated how dark it would be once we were in the woods, and how fast the light was fading away. We planned on making a fire, but we didn't really count on it being so dark when we got back there. So we're walking into this sort of clearing area, from where we can choose to head off in a few different directions. We're having a good time, laughing, talking, but something not too far in the distance suddenly catches my eye. It's too dark to tell what it is, but I swear that I can see a very large figure. But no, that's way too big. It's probably a tree or just my eyes messing with me. So as Jeremy is gabbing along in the background, I ask Craig as an insight if he can see something standing up ahead. He's like, "Nah, where?" "Oh, wait, there. Oh, yeah, I see something." We were still walking, and it was becoming clear that I wasn't seeing things. There was a very large person standing in the forest up ahead, apparently facing us. So I try to get Jeremy's attention without cluing the big guy in that we've noticed him, just in case something sketchy is going on, which I get the serious feeling that there may be. We tell Jeremy that there's a person up ahead, but Jeremy is in a jovial, no-chill state, and he exclaims, "Is that Bigfoot?" We humor him and laugh, but it's clear to Craig and I that this is actually creepy and probably not a safe situation, and it's clear that Jeremy is not understanding that. It's hard to communicate the pacing of our approach onto the guy, but essentially we had gotten too close not to acknowledge him, partially because it took us a moment to get Jeremy's attention, and partially because we weren't trying to just turn around and run like we were scared. There were 4 of us and 1 of him after all, but this was a big guy. Not supernaturally big or anything, and not like he was jacked or anything like that. Just a naturally huge dude, very tall and heavy without being particularly fat. And he was just standing there, in the middle of the forest, in the dark, alone. So, as we approach this guy and just sort of say, hello, Jeremy, the absolute fool that he was, gets way too close into this guy's personal space as he enthusiastically tells him about how scary he looked standing in the woods alone like that. We thought you were an alien or something, bro. I thought you were going to jump and be like, "Buh." Jeremy mimes an extra set of teeth coming out of his mouth like a xenomorph from the Alien vs. Predator movies. All up in this guy's face, mind you. To be clear, Jeremy is not trying to be intimidating or a jerk in any way. He's trying to be friendly and joking around with this guy, but he is literally leaning into this dude and practically sticking his hands in his face with his impression of an alien. Did I mention that Jeremy was kind of a moron? Well, Jeremy was kind of a moron. I love the guy, but it is what it is. And Jeremy's poor girlfriend, who was a few years younger than us and very shy, was clearly terrified, to which Jeremy was also oblivious. So Craig and I are both standing here kind of trying to brainstorm a way out of this situation. Jeremy is clearly too dense to get it if we say that we have to go. I mean, he'd be like, "What? We just got here. Aren't we having a fire?" Plus, we were trying to seem confident and in control of the situation. The big guy says, "Oh, are you guys drinking? I got some drinks too." And he walks over to the tree line where he has a bag laying beside a tree. He reaches inside the bag, and while he grabs a beer with one hand, he sort of sneakily pulls something else out with his other hand and places it in his hoodie pocket. I was convinced that it was a knife or a gun, probably a knife in all honesty. He then approaches us and cracks open his beer. I sort of glance around casually, and then I notice something else. Somebody else is out there too. There's someone moving along the tree line to our left, a relatively good distance away, but somebody else is out there for sure, and they're circling around us as if to come up behind us. And at that point, I was like, to heck with this. I need to leave now. So I go, "Well, I gotta work in the morning and Craig's driving me home, so we gotta get out of here." Jeremy, in his infinite wisdom, responds, "What? You said you didn't have work tomorrow." I facepalm so hard on the inside at this point. "No, Jeremy, you must have misheard me. I said that I do have work tomorrow." And Jeremy, proving that there's no end to his wisdom, says, "All right, guys, well, it was nice hanging with you. Get home safe." Apparently, he wasn't leaving the woods with us. Craig and I started walking away, and I told him about the other person circling to get behind us, and that we needed to move. We start trying to brainstorm a way to get Jeremy and his girlfriend out of there, and decide to call him and tell him that his mum was out in the parking lot looking for him. Jeremy is apparently terrified of his mum, Craig explains to me, and this should work. But we had to do this because we clearly couldn't just call him and tell him the situation was not safe without him blurting out, "This guy isn't sketchy, I feel totally safe." Jeremy was very mad at us for lying about his mum. I think his girlfriend appreciated it though. And in the end, we called them and we got them out of there. Now, I'm not sure what was going on there that night. I've talked to several people about it over the years, and there are a few different ideas. Did they know that we were coming back? Were they waiting for us? Or did we stumble onto something that we weren't meant to? Almost everyone I tell about this says, "You guys just accidentally interrupted a drug deal." But something about that just doesn't seem right. I mean, who does a drug deal in the middle of the woods at night like that? I don't know. It's very possible it's just a homeless dude with no ill intention, and another homeless dude with no ill intention again, but it was a very creepy and scary situation. And something tells me that more was going on there that perhaps we were better off not knowing. When I was a preteen, early teen, I had reoccurring nightmares involving my maternal grandparents. Their residence would change or be different in many of my dreams, but there would always be this dark room with an evil presence inside of it, usually on an upper floor. I would usually be too frightened to go inside, but the few times that I was brave enough to enter, there would only be darkness, that malevolent feeling, and sometimes there would be a mirror of all things. In one particular dream, my family on my mum's side was downstairs talking and enjoying themselves while I happened to be exploring in the evil room upstairs. I looked into the mirror and I saw the reflection of a girl running past me. When I ran downstairs to tell them what I had just saw, everyone and everything just became completely dead silent. They were all just sort of looking at me without saying a word, until my mum came up to me, placed her hand on my shoulder and said, "That girl represents the curse of my past." I rarely had any more of those dreams after that one. Now, some interesting, albeit creepy, real-life facts to consider. After my mum's parents died, my mum, aunts, and myself cleaned up their house, and I happened to find that exact same mirror underneath a bed in that room that, when I was a lot younger and my grandfather was still alive, he would always yell and call me out of it for some reason. I always felt some kind of, dark presence in parts of that house and their backyard shack as well. My grandfather was a Shriner Freemason, and according to my mum, he was very abusive towards her when she was young. She didn't really like to talk about it much though. Also, when my mum and her two sisters were young, they messed around with a Ouija board once. Hopefully just once, although it only takes one time apparently. There's a lot of strange things involving myself and my family, and I just provide this to paint a bit of a picture. So, what I saw when I was younger was this. I saw pale-colored, non-human creatures in my room once when I was really young. I remember, hallucinating is probably the best term for it, and crawling to the door. Then I heard my mother call for me from across the house, and I had enough willpower to go to get to her, and as soon as I exited my room, everything went pitch black for a couple of minutes. My vision was mostly gone, my awareness was screwed up, but both came back to me soon after feeling my way down the hallway into my mum's direction. I led her back to my room, but whoever or whatever was there was gone without a trace. Before she died in 2010, she told me that she remembered that occurrence, and for some reason, she was the one to use the word creatures, which always stuck out to me. Did she see something? I'm fairly certain that I'm not being told everything, and I just know deep down that whatever I saw was real. Two friends and I briefly witnessed a V-shaped UFO in Tulsa, Oklahoma as well one night, back in April of 2009. It was absolutely huge, seemingly cloaked, besides the dim lights, transparent or semi-transparent, slow-moving and completely silent. So far, the only unidentified craft I've seen, to my knowledge. On a related note, too, one of my paternal uncles was in the military. He actively researched UFOs for unknown reasons. He's very secretive about such things, and has at least 1 or 2 books about them, so my family seems to have a history with this, which, obviously with what I saw, is definitely a bit strange. This incident happened years ago, so I'm sorry if some information is a bit vague, but I'm just sharing what I can remember. So one day in the summer of 2017, it was a gloomy day at the start of our walk, but that's not relevant. Me and my bestie had decided to go for a hike. This time we decided to take the trail, even though we usually just walked wherever we wanted. But as we got to the bench, which was just over halfway up, we took a break. A young girl and her dog were jogging down the mountain. There was really nothing out of the ordinary, so we assumed that it was safe to go to the top. Once we got to the last turn before the top, I all of a sudden just got a really uneasy feeling. We continued, but near the top, there was a slope with lots of rocks and rubble, and I could see 3 or 4 men at the top conversing behind a bush of some sort. So I stopped dead in my tracks, and I then heard one of the men say frantically, hide the body bag." He said it just loud enough that me and my bestie knew what he had just said. my bestie took a couple of steps forward to see if it was just some teens messing with us, but it was a small group of men with a body bag. I never saw the bag, the body, or any of the men's faces. Me and my bestie just said quietly, "What do we do?" Then we gave each other the "get me the heck out of here" look, and we just booked it. None of the men followed us, thankfully, and we made it down the mountain safely. We ended up making a police report because my bestie saw the bag, the men, and also some old blood on the bag too. Despite the local police not believing us, they scraped the mountain. They originally didn't believe us and found nothing, but shortly after this encounter, a news report came out about an Australian guy that went missing, and his remains were found in my hometown. It was then that the pieces started to click. I personally believe that the man was killed way before they brought his body to the mountain to dispose of it. I mean, if you really think about it, they probably wanted the body to be found if they were stupid enough to ditch it on a public mountain with a hiking trail of all places. Of course, in the news report, they never said me and my bestie found the body because who would believe two teenagers, right? Plus, a search team had found the remains of the poor guy, so of course they're going to get all the credit. I still don't know to this day why this happened, but all I can say is that I'd never lie about witnessing something like this. It was truly messed up. So I don't know a ton about the history of my childhood home, but I know that it was old and one of the creepiest places that I've ever lived. It was a 4-story house, fancy, right? With lots of dark spaces and long stairways. Basically, it was really big. There wasn't a moment in that house that I felt like I was truly alone too, and there wasn't a hallway that felt truly empty. I was just barely out of toddlerhood when I started to develop severe anxiety. I was afraid to do anything alone. I was always checking behind me, sleeping with my head under the covers, seeing things, hearing things, you name it. I'm almost 100% sure that there was something paranormal making me feel this way at that time. And I wasn't the only one seeing and hearing things though too. My older brother shared a room with me, and he always slept on the top bunk. His bed was maybe a foot away from the ceiling, and the attic was right above us. And he told me that some nights, he would hear adult footsteps right above his head, just circling the attic. But it gets weirder still. He's told me that at one point, he woke up next to a shadowy figure just lying in the bed with him. He claims the figure had 2 white specks for eyes, and that it wasn't acting malicious, just sort of lying there silently. This might have been some kind of sleep paralysis hallucination, we know that, but considering the other events, I wouldn't be surprised if it was something else. And now, onto the main event, the playroom. That room was the creepiest thing in the house, and I get shivers just thinking about it. It sat at the end of a long hallway on the top floor, just below the attic. My room was down the hall from it, and it was always pitch black. I remember staying up at night staring at it just in case something moved. I often couldn't take my eyes away in fear of something appearing if I did. Somehow, every time that I looked at that doorway, the door was wide open, and the door wasn't weak either. It worked perfectly fine, and wouldn't open unless you turned the knob. I'd ask my dad to close it before I went to bed, and it would stay closed for a bit, until all of a sudden it would just slide open again. Now, I'm not a door specialist by any means, but it was arguably very creepy. But there's more to this as well. Now that we're older and out of that house, me and my brother found out that we shared a terrifying experience once. We both saw something incredibly creepy in the same place. I remember it vaguely. It was a small, neutral, glowing white face in the playroom. It looked a little bit like a kid from my memory, but it had no body, just a pure white face in the dark. It was around my height, and his eyes were kind of just, well, not there really. I don't remember much, but what I do remember is that it was the single most terrifying thing that I'd been through in that place. I don't know if I hallucinated or what, but I know that it felt incredibly real at the time. Maybe it was just a dream or something, because all I remember is seeing that face, getting scared and running back to my bed. I don't think that I screamed, but I just don't really remember too much. I kind of, I don't know, like, love-hate thinking about it because it just makes my hair stand on edge. Anyway, thanks to that house, I have now been diagnosed with anxiety. I'm taking medication for it and I'm alright, but I thought that that was worth noting. I could go on as well about other things, but those were definitely the things that stand out the most. So, a couple of weeks ago, I was headed out to my family cemetery about 5 miles outside of town. I hadn't been out there since a couple of days after Christmas, right after I had learned that my dad had finally lost his battle with lung cancer. I've spent a lot of time at that cemetery in the last few years. I like to go out there and do audio recordings, and just for the fact that it's so peaceful out there. And well, it used to be anyway. You see, I've had some really bad experiences out there in the last couple of years, have gotten some really nasty EVPs, and it turned into a very dark place at night, but that's a story for another time. Now, when I go out there, I always stop at a little country church about a mile down the road. The reason for this is because the church used to belong to my great-grandfather and my great-uncle, both of whom preached there, and I go there and ask for their protection and guidance before going to the cemetery, but on this night, I changed my pattern for some reason. Instead of going to the church first, I drove on past the cemetery about maybe a half mile to some property that my aunt and uncle own. There's a small creek that runs along the road, and just before you get to the creek is where my life started out at, the old homestead. Now, at the bottom of the hill, the creek sort of crosses under the road and makes a sharp turn to continue following the road. In that turn is what used to be a pretty deep hole. My mum and dad grew up right down the road from there, and all my family used to swim in that hole and fish. It's been a very long time since my parents and my uncle and even me have swam there. As a matter of fact, over the years that hole is filled in and sort of is no more, just a shallow bend in the creek. But back in the day, one of my uncle's high school friends drowned there. My uncle also drowned there, but they were able to revive him, thank God. So, anyway, when I arrived there, I backed my truck into the drive. I was barely off the roadway and left my headlights on and the motor running. I was only going to be there for maybe a minute. I started to record a video with my iPhone and was describing why I was going to the cemetery. Now, during all of this, at one point, I could have sworn that I saw something pop up from the creek and then go back down really quickly. However, I tried to ignore it and kept going on with my video. After a minute or so, it happened again though. I didn't miss a beat though, and I kept on filming, but noted that it appeared to be a figure of human nature, but sort of greyish white, kind of skinny, but I didn't see its face. Once again, I kept right on going, trying to ignore what I had seen, and then it happened a third time. But this time, it looked more grey than white, and there was no face, and at that moment, the feeling of something dark, unfriendly, and mad that I was there washed over me all of a sudden, and every hair on my body stood straight on end. I start saying, "This isn't good," repeatedly, and then I got the feeling that something aggressive and really mad was approaching very quickly. It's hard to describe, but that's the feeling that I got, and at that, I tried to get out of there as quickly as I could, but it wasn't quick enough. I don't know if you're familiar with the term, but if anyone is, then have you ever got what some call spirit jumped? It's where a spirit or entity jumps into your body. It's brief most of the time, but not brief enough. Your body goes into survival mode. Adrenaline dumps, but not like a normal adrenaline dump. This is like 10 times worse. It may also feel like your breath is sort of sucked right out of your lungs, and it's a struggle to breathe in any air. It's really scary when it happens, but you also feel like something evil has reached into your body and grabbed your soul all of a sudden. It's a very demanding warning to get the heck away, and that they mean business. So when I pulled out of there, I headed straight up the road to the church, but before I could get there, I heard a very ominous growl over my left shoulder and got hit a second time. This was much worse than the first time too. I became very vocal and demanded that it get away and get out of my truck, but whatever it was, it must have stayed there until I reached the church. But when I pulled in, I called upon my great-grandfather for help. Then I was hit a third time. It was brief, but the point was gotten across to me. All of a sudden, I could then feel everything lighten up, as they say. The hairs went down and I became relaxed fairly quickly. I left the church soon after and I went back home where I had my daughter bring out my Bible, and I didn't go inside until I was certain that whatever it was had left me. The next evening, I went to the family cemetery, stopping at the church first, of course. I used the Necrophonic app, which I use quite a bit from time to time. I didn't even ask about the night before, but I was told that there was evil at the creek. Stay away from the water. They call it dark water. I had never, in almost 3 years of using that app, ever gotten those responses, or any mentions of water or dark water. And no, I was not under the influence of anything. I take no medications, and other than some post-traumatic stress disorder, I have no mental health issues. Nothing that would cause this, at least. This particular area is pretty rural. The area had a lot of Native American activity, and is within 300 feet of a known burial ground, as well as another cemetery that has long been forgotten. As a kid, the woods around this area always seemed to have a dark side. We always felt watched when we were playing in the woods around there. There is also a piece of property within maybe a quarter mile that was rumored as apparently being owned by a witch. When I was around 9 years old, my friend and me were playing outside of our school. There was an event going on and it already got dark outside. We ran around, and to understand what happened next, you need to understand the layout of the schoolyard. So it was a big square with high bushes opposite of the school walls. It was just a straight line where kids would run and hide. There was space for about 2 people maybe standing next to each other between the bushes, and a fence to a pavement. Every 10 meters or so, there was an opening into this space between bush and fence. So my friend and me, we're running around and then disappear into the bushes laughing. We walked behind the bushes. Like I said, only a straight line was possible behind the bushes. It kind of stopped and looked straight ahead. There was a bus stop, the one that I used for like 8 years when I became 10. It was about maybe 15-20 meters away from us. And there was a woman standing there. She was looking straight ahead, but we only saw her right side profile. She had a white dress on, and that was when I noticed that I couldn't see any feet. She was hovering there. I didn't see any features, in fact. She was more like a smudge. That's what I thought it was at first too, just my eyes playing tricks on me. Until I looked at my friend staring also at her. We both kind of looked at each other confused. And then, scaring the life out of me, this smudge turned her head around, looked at us, and came closer at an alarming speed. We both screamed and ran outside the bushes to the middle of the yard, trying to catch our breath. I asked her what she saw, thinking that maybe I just startled her and caused her to scream because I screamed. But to my horror, she described the exact same thing that I saw. Us being stupid 9-year-olds, we started laughing, I think, and me being always the one stirring things up, I suggested to go back and check out if she was still there. My laughing stopped when I went behind the bushes and spotted her standing there again at that bus stop. And yet again, she slowly looked at us and started to come closer. This time we screamed and ran back inside the school. I remember not telling anyone anything because I knew that they wouldn't believe me. I've only told this story to a handful of people. I also lost contact with this friend, but I wish that I could talk to her again and ask her if she remembers this day as clearly as I do. When I was in college, I was out and about with my then boyfriend. We had gone to dinner, then went to Walmart to get some typical college food so that we could survive a Sunday in. I was dressed up in a casual dressy fit, and we decided to split up while we shopped, split apart, maybe to do quicker shopping, but I don't remember the exact reason why. I just remember that I was wandering the grocery aisles when I noticed this girl who was about my age. In a friendly manner, we casually smiled at each other and continued on shopping. It didn't seem weird at first, but I kept noticing her in the same aisles as me, and a big muscular man was never far behind us. Eventually, I texted my boyfriend and asked where he was and continued on shopping. Next thing I know, the girl approaches me and says that she loves my jacket. I say, "Thanks, Maurice's," and try to move on. She stops me and says something along the lines of, "Hey, you look like you're my age and seem really nice. I just moved here for a new job and company my friends and I are starting up," and tried to ask me questions about where I was from. I was vague and untrusting with what I said, noticing that this wasn't really that normal. Then she said, "I'm looking for more people like you, and I too work for our company. It's kind of a warehouse job, and I would love for you to be one of our bookkeepers. You should give me your number." I said, "That's really nice of you to offer me a job, but I'm not a desk person and already have a job that I love." She said, "That's a bummer. I thought we might work well together. Well, would you want to give me your number so that we can hang out? I would love to have a friend who can show me around the city." It was then that I realized that I wasn't getting out of this situation until my boyfriend showed up or I gave her my number. Eventually, I rattled off a fake phone number and said, "Hey, I'll catch you later, I gotta go." Then I walked away, praying my boyfriend would be near so that we could get out of there quickly. While I was looking for him and trying to call him, the girl called up to me and said, "I tried to call you, but it said the number was out of service." And as I tried to come up with a quick excuse and say, "Maybe you typed it in wrong," she saw that my phone was unlocked and in my hand. She quickly snatched it and called herself on it. I was so flustered and mad at her that I snatched my phone back right when my boyfriend came around the corner. He instantly recognized that something was up and said that we had to go. When the girl saw him approach me, she looked really disappointed to see him and stopped trying to interact with me. We ended up buying nothing and leaving. That night, we called our parents and the police too. The police said that they didn't think there was anything in it or anything ill-intended, but I was sure that it was probably trafficking. I was going to switch my phone number because I was actually a little bit scared. I blocked them though and turned off all location access on my phone. I was too scared to go anywhere alone for a little while too. I even told my coach so that she knew. Anyway, a couple of days later, I got a text from a random number. It was the girl. She sent a picture of my best friend who was out drinking downtown with some of her other friends. The text said, "I met your best friend. She gave me your number because I told her that I was looking for a new friend. She showed me a picture of you and I said, 'What a coincidence. I met her the other day and lost her number when I got a new phone.'" About 2 minutes later, I got a text from my best friend that said, "I gave your number to a girl who wants to make friends around here and is looking for people to join her business. And since I moved this week, I thought of you." I freaked out a bit at this and I told her that she needed to get away from this girl and not to leave alone with her. I stayed up worried until my best friend got home. She said that she was fine, otherwise I would have gone to pick her up. The next day, my best friend apologized and told me to block the number. My friend and her group tried to ditch her, but she kept showing up at the bars that they were at, which was weird because how did she know that they were there? She said the girl was relentless and texted her all night, trying to get my friend to hang out at her place. My best friend also said that when she asked about the business, the girl wouldn't give her many details, other than that it was a warehouse somewhere, would pay her great, in town, and if she wanted a tour of it, she would take her. Weirdly too, after this, we never actually heard from this girl again. It was as if she just fell off the radar completely. Anyway, today I was listening to a podcast and They mentioned different sex trafficking tactics. 2 were actually vague jobs where they would pay you well but needed you to come meet them to give you more information. And also a new-to-town girl who desperately needs new friends. I've been thinking about this all morning, and I'm really glad that I felt uncomfortable and that my friend didn't go with this girl as well. But I'm mostly mad that the cops ignored my concern and said that it was nothing. I at least hope that they wrote down the tip that night. I mean, I doubt they did, but honestly, it was really creepy vibes